Hello, 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 everyone. How we doing? Hello, Erica. Hello, Gamerg. Hello, Salty Turtle Cupcake. Hello, Bastion. Hello, Punky Gal. Hello, Boxy Cheshire. Hello, Banana Brains. Hello, Zia Spots. Hello, Firecrafted Gaming. Hello, Aaron Lee. Hello, Cute Dark Arts. Hello, the Knifiest Duck. Hello, Salmon Moose. Hello, everyone. A lot of shit happened today, and I'm not going to talk about most of it. I thought today would be nice to do like a chill gaming stream, answer questions, and also like maybe take a look at some political lectures. You know, expand our minds a little bit. And I have two different roads we could go down with that. I was thinking we could either listen to some Timothy Snyder lectures. I have a couple picked out about, the what he titles the road to unfreedom, and kind of the history of unfreedom in Russia, Europe, and America. And these are lectures from like 6 years ago, mind you. So he's talking under Trump 1.0, you know? The other option is lectures from Richard Wolff, who has some really dynamite lectures on worker co-ops. That's one I picked out. There's also one about that is titled Crisis and Openings, an Introduction to Marxism, which I think would be relatively apropos for our current historical moment. There are also a couple others. One is about, again, like I said, worker co-ops and kind of the theory and practice of like democratic worker co-ops. And there's also another one about capitalism, socialism, Trumpism, and neoliberalism. And so, like, I think these are all really great options, frankly. 50% of the stream viewers have liked the stream. Are you the cool 50% chat? True. Hello, Superjet Guy. Hello, Trains and Bullshit. Would you like some slow-cooked chicken legs? Yeah. Also, there a Korean barbecue place opened nearby where I live, and I went and tried it the other day. Let me tell you, Korean barbecued fried chicken fucks. It fucks. It's so fucking good. Hello, Joe Burt. Hello, Kraken Pill 2, the sequel to Kraken Pill 1, The Krakening. Hello. That lib one sounds good. Well, I think we might have to put it up to a vote. Hello, Lady Raincloud. Crisis slurs. Speaking of slurs, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you. There's a W tonight. SCOTUS stop Trump from using the Alien Enemies Act. Can you link me to something about that, Superjet Guy? That seems really, really important to note. Hello, Hoopsticks. Oi! Oi, governor! Wish me luck tomorrow. Good luck, Lady Raincloud. Going out to protest? Yeah, just keep in mind, folks, tomorrow, 5051 put out a bulletin to expect an increased police presence, because they expect the Trump administration to want to paint them as the bad guys. Don't give them a reason. From Mueller, she wrote. Whoa, 32 minutes ago. The Supreme Court has blocked the Trump administration from deporting foreign nationals under the Alien Enemies Act. Thomas and Alito dissent. Yeah, of course. But honestly, the fact that it's only Thomas and Alito, you don't have Gorsuch in there, you don't have even like, you don't have what's his face, the rapist, alleged rapist. Sorry. I want to say Brian Kilmeade, but I know that that is not his name. Hello, Alan Ayers Dresner. Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, thank you. Yeah. Wow, the Supreme Court operated fast on this one. There is before the court an application on behalf of a punitive class of detainees seeking an injunction against their removal under the Alien Enemies Act. The matter is currently pending before the Fifth Circuit. Upon action by the Fifth Circuit, the Solicitor General is invited to file a response to the application before this court as soon as possible. The government is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court. Justice Thomas and Justice Alito dissent from the court's order. Statements from Justice Alito to follow. That is really interesting. That is really interesting. Do you have any idea what it takes to get the Supreme Court off of its ass? Do you guys have any idea what it takes? That is an extraordinary divergence from their usual MO. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and guess it had something to do with this earlier today. The Dallas ICE office is involved in a mass removal effort targeting nearly 200 people, many without removal orders, scheduled to be deported to El Salvador today. So my guess is that the Supreme Court was called to act on this specifically because hundreds of more people were about to be deported to this concentration camp. So that's let me tell you guys something. Okay? Let me tell you guys. I have been very worried about the makeup of this Supreme Court, given that it was constructed by Donald Trump. And I have been very pessimistic about the Supreme Court actually deciding to side with the basic mechanisms of our democracy and our basic constitutional rights. And seeing this is extremely heartening because it is breaking down as I kind of hoped it would. Like, best case scenario, I knew that, like, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas were not going to be on the right end of history, you know? This is the absolute best case scenario for them to actually begin intervening like this. So that I'm surprised, but like in the best possible way. Hello, and I literally can't read your name. So I need to bestow upon you some kind of name. Mike Pop #1, the first of many to come. There's nothing I can do about that here. Sorry. I'm just going to call you Unknown. There we go. Nailed it. Hello, Firefishy. Unfortunately, they're going to have a hearing in May on birthright citizenship. This is personal. Well, I mean, yeah, but like they were always going to have that hearing. Call me Phil? Okay, Phil. Now we see if the executive branch heeds it at all. That's the big question, Hoopsticks. They've been saying over and over and over again and paying lip service to the idea that they are going to listen to the courts. We will see. We will see. If they don't, then we're going to be in a very different kind of protesting and mobilizing era. But I think, given the fact that earlier today they also stood down from challenging Harvard, they're now putting out statements about how their letter to Harvard was a mistake. Someone in their administration goofed, I guess, and sent that list of demands to Harvard. I'm guessing they don't have anywhere near the power that they need to actually hold on to this country. Yes, also the White House does have posts doubling down on deporting undocumented people to El Salvador. And yeah, I'm aware of the lab leak shit. Yep. It's always an oops email with these people. Yeah, but we all know that's horse shit. And honestly, by now, the courts also know it's bullshit. You know? What are we playing tonight? No, I was thinking we could open up with some Shape Hero Factory, because I've really been enjoying it. Shout out to Salmon Moose for getting me hooked. We're going to talk about RFK Jr.'s recent autism speech. Today I was thinking we would do more of like a learning stream. Like, I was thinking we would go over either a Timothy Snyder lecture on, the road to unfreedom in Russia, Europe, and America, kind of comparing these three countries, talking about like how different countries maybe could have intervened, or different populations could have intervened or taken action to avert their fate. And alternatively, I think we might open with some Richard Wolff. It's been a while since we had some Dick Wolff. I'm going to give you guys two options, okay? Here are your options. Did you hear about Will and Harper? I don't know what that means. Oh, the Netflix documentary? Yeah, I heard about it. Harvard gave us Kissinger. Let's not get too protective of. Well, yeah, but like, Hitler also drank water. All I'm saying here is that like it is good when the largest and most powerful educational institution in the country says no to a fascist dictator, and then they crumple like a paper tiger. Oh, Will and Harper's really good. That's awesome. Hello, Archangel Decab. All right, folks. You know what? In honor of Timothy Snyder and Harvard, we'll watch his Harvard lecture on the road to unfreedom.
What falls to me as the last speaker and as a humanist, as a historian, is to try to address this question of us and them in a slightly broader way, or to draw out some of the early arguments that have been made and to crystallize them and conceptualize them to give us a sense of where we actually are. Because frankly, it's rather extraordinary that late in the second decade of the 21st century at the Harvard School of Government, at a cosmopolitan gathering like this, we should be thinking about us and them at all. That is really not the way it was supposed to have gone. And I think it might be helpful if we start by remembering what the politics of us and them has been in the last 100 years, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, in the Western tradition, which is what I know something about. Because it's not just that notions like black and white or ethnicity or citizenship, Americanness, Germanness, as has been discussed, it's not just that those things are plastic and elastic and change. It's also that who is us and who is them at a much higher level is also very flexible. It may be that us and
Wait, I feel like the only thing saving us right now is that John Roberts believes the judicial branch should be the most important special branch, so when the regime tries to sidestep or undermine them, he gets upsetty. I mean, genuinely, yeah. But I'll take it. I'll take it. It's a surprise. I'll take it.
and them is always
Hey,
with
Van
us.
Briggs.
But what the us is and what the them is subject to change over time. And the institutions that help to form these changes are also subject to change. So I want to start by making a very basic point about liberal political theory and us and them. Liberal political theory begins from the assumption that we are living in a three-dimensional space and that the us is created at some real or usually mythical contractual moment where those of us who are in this state form some kind of a contract or a constitution in which we agree to be us by following certain rules indefinitely, right? A real or mythical moment of such a kind is at the beginning of the liberal notion of the polity and the liberal notion of the state. So there is a pre-politics to liberalism, and the pre-politics is we can become an us by agreeing to become an us. The pre-politics of
Nani?
totalitarianism is very different. And it's striking to me as an observer of this conference, as an observer of the world in general, how the pre-politics of totalitarianism is returning without us necessarily noticing that this is the case. Because we spent so much of the last 25 years convincing ourselves that history is over, that there are no alternatives, our vocabulary of discussing political alternatives and alternative political concepts has been significantly, I think, impoverished. So we may not notice this, but the totalitarian pre-politics of us and them has been creeping up on us. What do I mean by this? Well, just for old time's
Tell
sake,
us what
let me
you
talk about
mean,
communism
smart
for a
man.
minute. So both communism and fascism have in common a different pre-politics, which says nature is such that there is always an us and a them, right? The liberal pre-politics says that we gather ourselves in a three-dimensional space, and as against nature, we say, here we are according to human rules. Communism and fascism both say, no, by nature, there is always an us and them. That us and them is irresolvable, and it crosses political boundaries. It's inside the state and outside the state. So the way that communism works is it says that nature leads to technological change, which leads to classes, which leads to class conflict. And that leads to a world where conflict is inevitable, because inside my country, outside my country, there are classes which must be in conflict. And that kind of argument can be used if you're in power, for example, in the Soviet Union, to justify planned famine, to justify terror, to justify show trials.
So kind of what he's saying here is that this type of thinking leads to this authoritarian type crackdown in order to address this narrativized idea of class struggle outside, therefore we are justified in clamping down inside, if that makes sense.
Fascism has a different account of how nature means that there must always be conflict. Fascism says that nature is such that there are just different races in the world. That's just the way things are, that's the way it always has been, that's the way it always will be. Many fascists would add, in addition to the races, there are also Jews or some other supernatural conspiratorial being who organized the world.
I know he didn't mean to, but he did really make it seem like he was saying that Jewish people are supernatural. And no, they're just cool.
World the way that it actually is. Again, this means that there is permanently an enemy both inside and outside, and the enemy inside is also the enemy outside. So if you have a Jewish minority inside your country, that Jewish minority represents a global threat, right? It's not inside, it's also outside. And if there is a nation next to you, destroying that nation or overcoming it is part of an eternal global struggle for land and dominance. So what I'm stressing here is that this is a perfectly coherent pre-politics. It has a very strong,
very welcome, Jazz
I would like
Dog.
to think, resonant history, at least in our memories, from both
email.
communism and fascism. And it's worth stressing that this is also highly theorized. So, for example, Carl Schmitt, for reasons which are slightly mysterious to me, remains a very influential.
Yeah, I'm aware that communism isn't fascism. However, are you aware that Stalinism isn't communism? Are you aware that the Soviet Union did not practice communism. And again, like, this is not the place really to pick a fight about that, because I know that. You've been here before for longer than 5 minutes.
Influential political theorist, says quite clearly that politics begins with the definition of friend and enemy, right? That is the opposite of the liberal notion. The liberal notion says politics begins when we all agree to practice certain rules, and that creates a we. Schmitt says, let us make a more or less arbitrary decision as to who is a friend and who is an enemy, and then start from there. He's the most interesting Nazi legal thinker, as I'm sure you know. The most important philosopher in the world right now is probably Ivan Ilyin, who is a Schmittian fascist, who is the favorite of the president of Russia, who says that politics is the art of identifying and neutralizing the enemy. Again, we start politics, our pre-political notion is friend and enemy.
Also, just as an FYI, if you're gonna, purity test every single intellectual who gives some kind of speech or some kind of lecture, you're gonna run out of them very quickly.
We start with us and them. We don't start with the state. We don't start with rules. We start with friends and enemies. We start with us and them. So what I'm trying to stress here is that there is a historical arc here which is worth following. This was suggested in the previous panel as well, where the history of us and them can help us to see where the us and them of the present is going. And I'll close by saying something.
Hey, Ivory Valentine. Just realized yesterday I've been watching Jack's stream and most of her videos since the last mass call stream. Can't say how grateful I am for the slice of sanity and much needed motivation, so I wanted to try and get in the habit of hanging out on the side chat. Thank you, Ivory Valentine. Welcome. I hope you enjoy your time here. I wasn't trying to say time too many times. Can you make the argument that fleeing the US because of Trump is giving up on fighting fascism and Trump? I mean, yeah, you can make that argument. Would I? Probably not. Can I might make the smart speaker man ladder? I certainly can. See how that goes. Yeah, I mean, like, the issue is, like, fleeing the United States, that's not, like, you can weigh your options, of course, but, like, some people have families. Some people have kids. Some people, like, know that they are going to, like, be targeted and aren't willing to be sent to a gulag, like. So some people would just not, if they know that they are going to be personally targeted, And I do not fault anyone for not being willing to be crucified. Like, fuck.
About the future. So the first globalization is what brought us these nice things, fascism and communism. We say globalization as though it was as though ours is the first. It's not, right? Ours is repeating in an odd way. Ours is repeating the first global.
And yeah, some people are broke as fuck and can't leave, and like, yeah, that is part of the state of the world. There are no countries that take disabled people. Well, also, to be fair, there are no countries that are currently taking American refugees, so it's kind of beside the point. If it gets bad enough that countries are taking refugees, like, I don't know, do any of you guys fault the Jewish people who fled Nazi Germany? Like, I certainly fucking don't.
Globalization of the 1890s through the 1940s. In the first globalization, there was also a liberal consensus. There was also optimism that export-led growth would lead to an enlightenment. There was also optimism that technology was going to have to lead to enlightenment. All of that, to make the long story short, this turns out not to be true. Fascism and communism arise from the shock and from the inequality of the First World War and the Great Depression, the culmination, the end of the first globalization, and the Second World War.
I think a good way to make sense of a lot of what he's talking about when it comes to communism, is very specifically Stalin's formulation. I do think that Stalinism is a horrific thing. But a lot of people call it communism, and it just is not.
Now, Very briefly,
Who is this guy? This is Timothy Snyder, the author of On Tyranny, the book about, you know, how to successfully resist authoritarianism.
Summarizing what comes next. After the Second World War,
Logan
there
Hill,
was a
thank you for the gifted membership.
reconsolidation of liberal theory on slightly different premises. And this was also mentioned in the previous panel. We were going to have Keynesian economics to deal with shock. Keynesian economics is basically a psychological theory. It says that we should not subject the population to shocks because then they will change the political regime before the market can correct itself. Maybe theoretically markets always correct themselves, but before they can correct themselves, the shock will lead to a political change which will do away with the market. So Keynesianism is basically a psychological improvement on market economics. The second basis for the reestablishment of liberal political thought was the welfare state, which was meant to deal with radical inequality, the kind that emerged in the 1920s. And the third new basis was economic integration, chiefly that of the European
Shape Hero
the
Factory.
European states, which had never existed as states, only as empires, saw their empires collapse during and after the Second World War, and they reestablished them. They reestablished states, or really established them, on the basis of integration. Now, in this history, which I've just given you in the last 90 seconds, but I hope not entirely unsatisfactorily, there are a couple of periods. The first period, the first globalization, roughly the 1890s through 1940s. The second period, the reconsolidation of the liberal order, roughly 1945 to 1989, maybe a little bit later. What I'd like to do in the remainder of this talk is ask about the historical period that we're in now, because it seems to me as a historian that the rules of the game have changed dramatically, and yet the premises of the discussion are surprisingly similar. The terms and the concepts that we're using today seem to me very often to be 20th century concepts, whereas it strikes me that we are disconcertingly in a different world, and that a lot of what we're doing is working our own experiences back into the concepts of the 20th century to try to suggest to ourselves that things.
I disagree that Stalin was not communist. In my opinion, you're confusing communism with anarchism. I don't know. I just don't see that there's any way to really interpret what Stalin did as giving workers ownership and control over their own workplaces. State ownership of a thing is not the same as worker ownership of a thing, and I think that that is pretty basic, a pretty basic thing to wrap your head around.
Haven't really changed, when maybe they really have. The way that I'm going to frame this is the shift from a three-dimensional world to a two-dimensional world. That where we are now is a place which is quite powerfully characterized, not so much by media, that word is too broad, but by spending time on the internet. And I'm not looking at you, sir, in particular, I just am talking about the internet. That the experience of the internet has changed the way that we engage with the world to such a profound degree that we are afraid even to talk about it, right? So I'm going to take that burden off your shoulders, and I'm going to talk about it right now. So the internet was supposed to liberate, right? Just like in the first globalization, in the second globalization, we have these fantastic technologies which are supposed to automatically enlighten. And the internet was number one. What has actually happened? As internet penetration has spread from roughly 20% in 2005 to roughly 55 or 60% now, we have seen during those 11 years, every single year, a rise in authoritarianism and a decrease in democratic regimes. I'm just going to follow the quantifications of Freedom House. In the one place where people find good news, which is Africa, you have the lowest international levels of internet penetration. In the United States of America, people on average now look at screens and depend on demographics, the internet, for an average of almost 11 hours a day, right? That is most.
Let's see, who said socialism is worker ownership?
Waking.
Literally Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. Marx and Engels never specifically said state ownership is not socialism. Yeah, but they also never said, like, I don't know, My Little Pony is the best animated feature to come out of television. You know, like, they didn't say a lot of things. But the point being that, like, a state, for reasons I feel are pretty obvious, is not the workers at a place.
ours, which means that it doesn't actually make sense to apply, if that's true, it doesn't make sense to apply political concepts from a three-dimensional world in which people are no longer living, right? And I say that to you, members of this,
Also, hey, Jack, so you mentioned the ultimate goal of socialism is to replace the state with something else. What would we replace the state with? Wouldn't any group leading a country become a state? Well, no, it's not. The ultimate goal of socialism, communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society, right? And so what would replace the state? Nothing. Now, granted, that sounds insane, and I recognize that. That being said, when we say, like, oh, it's a stateless society, what we're talking about is simply there is no longer a need for state institutions. There would still be some kind of, like, governmental structure, but there's a difference between, like, government and a state. Does that make sense? Like, most of human history, there were governmental structures, but there weren't states as we would recognize them today. Does that make sense? The refusal to call Stalinism communism is the same thing as stressing the difference between Trumpism and the 20th century U.S. republicanism. You're giving a fascist regime the floor to define things by their terms after they subsumed a well-regarded ideology to serve their ends. Yeah, and I mean, also, like, it just definitionally is not the thing, It's like when people say, like, well, Nazism, National Socialism, that was, they called themselves socialists, so clearly they must have been socialists, and, like, that's not, no, actually. You need to look at the function of a thing. Sounds like the goal of the Musk administration. Man, we're really all trying to fight tonight, aren't we? It's really bizarre, but okay. The modern nation state arose in the 18th and 19th century, is my understanding. Yeah. It's a relatively modern invention. Well, and Amber Brains, when we're talking about, like, a stateless, classless, moneyless society, we're talking about, like, something that's literally, like, hundreds, if not thousands of years away from where we are. Because, like, that's a society that would not have funds, like, we're talking about, like, Star Trek shit. Why are we fighting? I don't know. I'm chilling listening to a lecture. People are fighting for, I don't know.
Elite. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the research which shows that if your iPhone is actually visible to you, it makes it less likely that you will remember
Exactly,
what's
Ivory
going on
Valentine.
right now, right? I'm sure you know that, right? I'm sure you're aware that the fact that you have your iPhones on your table makes it less likely that you will remember the lecture that you're listening to right now. You're familiar with this research, I have no doubt, and yet you all have your iPhones on your table, right? This is the 3- and 2-dimensional world that I'm going to try to talk about. So where I want to go with this is to suggest that the way that we have been thinking about the 2-dimensional world, the way that we've been thinking about computers and the internet, may be starting entirely from the wrong premise. If you remember, the classic way that we were taught to think about computers was something called the Turing test. Do you remember what the Turing test is? The great computer scientist, one of the great minds of the 20th century, Alan Turing, sets up this test which says, how do we know when a computer can think? How do we know when there's artificial intelligence? And the answer is, if a computer behind a screen can answer our questions in a way that we can't distinguish it from a person, then we can say that de facto it has consciousness, okay? Now, the interesting thing about that is that that test assumes that we are reasonable, skeptical people consistently asking questions like scientists of computers. That turns out not at all to be the way that we engage the digital world. Not
Yeah.
at all. That turns out to be a flattering image of us, which is not at all true. What was the first computer program to pass the Turing test? It was a very, very primitive program in the 1960s, which pretended to be a psychoanalyst. In other words, we believe computers are real when they ask us about our feelings, right? And
Yep.
that is the most profound truth
I do have to say, I have no idea where he's going with this.
about us. What has happened with the internet and social platforms in the 21st century is that they become better and better at asking us about our feelings and drawing us into a world where it seems like our feelings matter. But of course, they don't matter to the robot on the other side at all, which brings me to what I want to discuss about cyber and politics and where we seem to have been going. I'm going to focus
Cyber
on the 2016 American elections here because it seems to me that America is still a reasonably important country. We are still something.
Seems like
I mean,
it.
whenever I hear my colleagues refer to America as a democracy, I always put asterisks up, in the air. But we are still something that resembles a rule of law democracy. So I'm going to focus on this example, but I'm going to try to speak more generally about some of the mechanisms by which cyber changes the way that we see us and them.
Cyber.
And by the way, before I get to this, I want to make my own little point, lest I forget, about the actual us and the actual them. There's an us and them, which we haven't talked about at all, and that are the computers as such, right? The machines on your table are actually a them. You just invited them into your lives, right? Your neural circuitry is interacting constantly with the code that people have written in order to manipulate your mind, right? To such an extent that you can't even stop doing it even when I'm talking to you about it, right? But that is a them. That is actually a them. I mean, much more than any human out there, that is actually a them. And it's a them that gets into this three-dimensional world. The familiar experience that we've had in this conference of someone asking a question which doesn't actually interact with what was just said because that person spent the session on his computer, right? And he thinks that it's interactive, but it's actually not. That's the two-dimensional world interfering with the three-dimensional world. And it's that them interfering with the us here, right? Because everyone feels that disjuncture.
Oh, good
that
luck,
person
Vox
was
Syndicate.
somewhere else, but they think they were here, right? And that's weird. I'm just pointing that out.
This is an authoritarian
No,
chat.
I'm not taking advantage of the fact that somebody's not in the room or anything like that. Okay, so what are some of the specific ways that cyber changes this question of us and them? What are some of these mechanisms? What are some of the ways that cyber matters? I'm going to make 3 brief points and then I'm going to make sure you guys have enough time for dinner. The first is that it makes the them non-existent. So the them is always to some extent distant or maybe mythical, but in the world of cyber, the them doesn't really have to exist. So let's take the them of the Syrian refugee, right? There aren't any Syrian refugees in Hungary, although it was the major electoral issue in Hungary. There aren't any Syrian refugees in Indiana, although Mike Pence has promised to ban them. And by not any, I mean like 24 or fewer, okay? So de facto, there aren't any actual people. And we heard a similar line of argument about Brexit, where there actually are immigrants. People did not vote for Brexit. Where there weren't immigrants, it was a salient issue. Why is that? Why is there such a paradox? Because people do interact with the other, it's just not the real other. The people who are voting for Brexit were not in contact with real immigrants, but they were in contact with cyber immigrants. They were in contact with tropes and memes and bots who were telling them to be afraid of immigrants. It's not the absence of contact, it's the contact with a them that is not actually a them at all, at least not in the real three-dimensional world. So that's one thing which happens, which is that you have a them, but
Yeah, Screech, I like your comment there. Given infinite time, I'm sure a true socialist society will exist. I just can't imagine it. And that's the thing. I don't think people under feudalism could imagine what a functioning democracy would be like. You know, there are a lot that there is a horizon of possibility that we are all trapped within that limits our ability to imagine. And I forget who wrote it, but like we are more easily positioned to imagine like the end of the world than we are to imagine the end of capitalism. You know, like when I think about that when it comes to like Fallout, for example, like we imagine like the complete desolation of humanity, and yet we still have capitalism occurring in in the wastelands. Um, so it's one of those things where like we are limited by our time. You know, if you took like a Neanderthal living in a cave with a small like society, like a, you know, handful, maybe 12 people, right? Um, they wouldn't ever be able to imagine like a city with 1 million people in it. Like we can't imagine the kind of worlds that might be in the future when like we have space stations or something like that, like where people live and die and work and laugh and love. You know, like it's we can try and imagine it, and that's fun. And I imagine that there are people in the past in various other conditions who imagined what a society such as ours would be like, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the human spirit, that we constantly reach for something better. You know? Totally off topic, but but you just told us to remind you about Mind Horse. I do want you to remind me about Mind Horse, but on not today. I'm not equipped to like deal with that right now. But I will take a look at it on Monday or maybe tomorrow. I'm going to be on Dead Domain stream at some point. Described the state as a system and the government as the body that executes it. So by that definition, a stateless society would be like a computer with no OS. So that's why I don't understand it. No, I mean, like, again, think about what a group of like 12 people might do. Would you call like a group of 12 people who have interpersonal rules and like have, you know, modes of conduct and et cetera, like if you've ever been to like a small gathering of people, would you call that like a state? No. No one would. And it's precisely that kind of like amicable coexistence, but writ large. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I can't really imagine it or how it would function either, which is why I don't, you know, spend a whole lot of time advocating for like the abolition of the state, just because I don't think we're anywhere close to that. And if we were able to do it like Thanos snap style, I think the world would kind of fall into chaos. Like, I don't think we are positioned for that to be successful. I think maybe a better way of conceptualizing the state would be like nation states, like the concept of nation states, which is relatively newer. That was more of Marx's time. And now we just kind of take them as givens. Is it something we must grow into? Yeah, like when I talk about, you know, achieving like communism, you know, a stateless, classless, moneyless society, I believe in achieving that via evolutionary methods, i.e., like people democratically deciding upon policies that get us there, you know? And through those policies, through the betterment of all, we get to, you know, kind of a point where the need for a nation state falls away. It diminishes. It falls apart. So, Magical Girl Madness, we're all sending hugs to you too. I had a session with my therapist who was trying to tell me that left extreme positions were just as problematic as the problems we face with the. Oh man, that's That is a spicy relationship with your therapist. Yeah, and like we can get into the nitty gritty details. I just think that like in general, the process that I envision and think is probably the better one, as opposed to massive, mass global war against the classes. Um, like I think we need to collectively achieve it, because if we just try and do socialism in one country, it inevitably gets eroded by capitalism or destroyed by capitalistic armies, So I think we need to do better than capitalism via democratic methods that are already shown to be able to, in a sense, cut back capital, reduce the power of capital. Like we know that we can do that thanks to like FDR. And so the idea being it cannot simply be, one nation above many. It has to be all of us together. With advanced enough tech, I can see something like a group of millions operating as a group of friends is possible. Well, yeah, that's kind of I do think it also would work better with greater technological advancement, for sure. And again, I do think that one of the most promising vehicles for moving us in that direction are democratically run worker co-ops, because that would almost by its nature be a check on capital, and not necessarily a check that is completely sufficient. It might need to be paired with state reforms as well. But normalizing and spreading democratic worker co-ops as a primary model of economic development and like production, I think is a colossal step towards an evolutionary form of socialism. And again, I do think that state like capitalism, I mean, how do I put this? I think that worker ownership as an idea is something that people more readily understand and agree with and can envision, as opposed to, the end of money or the end of capitalism or the end of a state, So I think that these are, I think we start with the step in front of us before we start thinking about the step that is, a mile ahead. And we have to be ready for like there to be failures, like democratic worker co-ops don't always succeed, guys. And that's fine.
But the them is not actually existent, like it's not actually human. The second thing that happens is that us ceases.
I don't know enough about Harley Davidson
ceases
to
to
know
exist in a
how to
normal
answer that
sense.
question.
Let me give you a few examples. The first I've already suggested in a joking way, which is the self-disintegration of self-cyborgization, right? If you are taking part, for example, in a public gathering like a conference, and you spend your time on your phone or on your pad or whatever because you just can't help yourself because you're addicted and you're a cyborg, if that's what you do, you are disintegrating yourself in an important human way, because it means that you're not actually in the us that might have been. I mean, the research on this is actually all very categorical and very strong. You're more likely to misremember or not remember things that happened during the conference itself, including your own participation, right? So the choice not to be with a physical
that's true, Vox Syndicate.
is a choice that we now make
Natural
all
disasters
of the time,
bring out
right? I realize I'm ratcheting up the guilt
people.
level, as the speech goes on. But it's worth being aware of the elephant in the room, right? The elephant in the room are those little flat screens which you, as a cosmopolitan intellectual elite, are nevertheless carrying. Imagine what it's like if you're not part of that elite. Okay, so That's one way, is the self-cyborgization. The second way that the us becomes non-existent is that very often across the screen, you think the thing on the other side of the screen is also like you, right? So it's me plus that thing on the other side of the screen is an us. But what if the thing on the other side of the screen is actually a bot? Which very often it is. So for example, in the case of Brexit, 20% of the political conversation was carried out by bots. And people did not know that, right?
Oh, that's
so you
actually
think there's a
insane.
we
What?
here. Oh, I'm talking to this sympathetic thing that's telling me about all those dangerous immigrants. You think it's a we, but it's not. You're actually all alone. In fact, you're more alone than alone because you're in the company of code, which is making you feel like you're not alone, which is not only desperately sad, but is politically significant because it probably caused the Brexit vote, right? So that's another way that the we in us doesn't really exist. A third way is slightly less sinister, although it's pretty sinister, is the human troll. So consider the example of Russian intervention in the American elections in 2016. Tennessee GOP had 10 times more followers than the actual Tennessee Republican Party. Heart of Texas, which was a Texas secessionist site, had more followers than the Texas Republican and Democratic parties put together. The people who were interacting with those sites thought they were interacting with Americans, but they weren't. They were interacting with Russians. When
That's
Michael
crazy,
Flynn,
dog.
who was our national security advisor for whatever it was, 23 days, but when Michael Flynn is passing on content from 12 different Russian sites, he thinks he's interacting with Americans, but he's not. Right? There's something wrong with his we, or there's something wrong with the we of hundreds of thousands, actually tens of millions of people, tens of millions of people who think that the we on the other side is another American in this case, but it's actually not. The next way that the us becomes non-existent is that when those of us who spend time on the internet think that we know more because we've interacted with knowledge, but in fact we know less. This is a very familiar phenomenon, right? The more time you spend on the internet, the more you think you're an expert on a given subject, the less you know. And that the reason why that makes us less of an us is that it's only the things that we actually know that are correct about the real world, this is about polarization, can unite us. If you think one thing which is false and I think another thing which is false, that does not unite us, right? Being wrong does not overcome polarization. Having actual factual knowledge does. And the anecdotes here are, of course, overwhelming, like that the 20 biggest fake news stories in the United States were more widely read than the 20 biggest news stories in the 6 weeks before the American election. Fairly significant, those sorts of things. Okay. So where this comes down is that in an odd sort of way, there's this kind of paradox, which is that the us doesn't really exist, and the them doesn't really exist either.
I found the only good use for AI. The guy programs a bot army to call and waste scammers' time. Yeah, I mean, like that. I would agree that would be a good use of it.
And all you're left with is the sense of us versus them. That's it. An empty sense of us versus them, which nevertheless motivates people to do things. But what you're left with is what I would call a kind of dark globalization, where it's not that some kind of normal and functional US democracy projects its norms around the world, but rather the fissures and the emptinesses and the gaps and the flaws in American society are openings by which people can penetrate unseen, whether it's Russia or whether it's Cambridge Analytica, which from the point of view of an American citizen is also just a bunch of foreigners, right? There were no US citizens in Cambridge Analytica in any position of authority, so you can pick your foreign actor, but either way it's a foreign actor. You're in a dark globalization where you can think, and this is the thing about polarization in the US, you can think the Democrats are the enemy, right? What were the Russian bots firing on election day in this country? What hashtag were they firing on election day? War against Democrats. That was the Russian robots hashtag on election day in the US. Hashtag war against Democrats. You can think that the enemy is inside your country, but it's a foreigner who's teaching you that that's true. It's a foreigner who's helping you, who's teaching you that that's the case. So what do you then do about this? Okay, conclusions, 2 words. The first is, if we are going to pick whether cyber is moving us towards liberalism or whether cyber is moving us towards fascism, I think if those are the choices,
Cyber.
I think it's pretty clear that fascism is the answer, right? It's not exactly like the original fascism. There's not mobilization to get your bodies out in the street, for example. There's not so much control. There's not so much interest in territory. But it's if you had to pick, that seems to be the better analog than more liberalism, right? So this whole story the internet tells about itself, about enlightenment, I think that we should not be starting from that presumption. Let me put it that way. The second thing I say, is, and I'm going to end on a slightly hopeful note, is that it's very important not to trade the happy internet story for another determinist story which says it has to go all wrong. I mean, just because it is going all wrong doesn't mean that it has to go all wrong. The history of technology is also a human history. So the printing press caused a third of the people in Europe to die, but now we like the printing press, right? Radio helped bring about fascism, but now we like radio. Someday we're going to like the internet too, but in order for the internet to be productive of liberalism or democracy, we have to see the internet as something with which we're going to interact historically. The story that it's all good is wrong. The story that it's all bad is also wrong. But if we don't engage with it historically, I think we can see pretty clearly which way it's bringing us. Thanks.
Nailed it.
But I have a feeling, because that was just fascinating and surprising, that I'm only going to get one, and then I'm going to turn this over to you. But the obvious question, given the stakes of what you're talking about, and given what we've witnessed in the last couple of weeks, as lawmakers and regulators try to get their arms around what we're looking at and the complexity of it, is how much faith do you have in regulatory institutions? Certainly we're seeing what the Europeans are doing, in regulators here and lawmakers here, to move us in the direction of thinking differently, for starters, and acting differently, and putting up some guardrails against what you are noting is a significant challenge to democratic systems.
Yeah, so I don't have faith in anything, but I think that I mean, not on this earth anyway, but I think that what worries me is that the regulative response, both vis-a-vis Silicon Valley and also vis-a-vis Russia, is reactive, right? So you have one group of people who says it's Silicon Valley's fault, and another group of people who say it's Russia's fault. There's a little tiny bit of overlap. And everybody's right in all of this, right? I mean, Facebook did not have to be designed the way that Facebook is designed. It didn't have to be quite so totalitarian. Twitter doesn't have to have the libertarian ideology that it has, which says the truth will always out in the end, which is ridiculous. But you know, and we didn't have to be so foolish, and this is what a lot of Road to Unfreedom is about. We didn't have to be so foolish as not to understand that Russia could do to us, the things that they'd been perfecting in Estonia, the European Union, and Ukraine over the previous decade. Why did we assume that wouldn't happen to us when we have so many vulnerabilities? But it's the reason why I start with theory is that I want to get strongly away from the assumption that democracy works on its own, and it's just these kind of problems from the outside, from California or from Moscow, right? I think we have to seriously ask ourselves, doesn't democracy need a three-dimensional space, right? I mean, the Greeks thought so, the Swiss think so, right? So is it really possible for us to have just a two-dimensional space and have democracy? And if not, maybe we should spend less than 11 hours a day in front of screens, right? I mean, I find it astonishing. It's like obesity in America. Like, you say everything except exercise more, right? If you exercise more, that would also be good.
Also, you know, guys can be wrong sometimes, you know? Like, I'm not saying this guy is right about 100% of the things he says.
For the internet. No, it's really simple. The less time people spend in front, look, if Americans spent 8 hours instead of 11 hours a day in front of screens, I'm pretty sure the presidential election would have gone a different way. And so saying that like maybe democracy actually requires a three-dimensional space, and this is what I wanted to say at the end, but I forgot. Thinking about the internet as a space, right? Right now, we treat the internet like a land of exception.
Matatiahu, I appreciated your Robin Wizard hat reference.
We don't treat it like a public space at all. I mean, we have rules. If you look out at Harvard or Harvard Yard or whatever, there are rules about how we think about public space. And we don't say that's repressive, we just say that's public space. I think we have to think about the internet as being a public space and decide what the conventions are going to be inside that public space. I mean, if we were going to insist on spending our waking lives in there, then which please don't, but if we have to, then I think we have to think about it as a space which has a form, just like the three-dimensional space has a form.
Whose responsibility is it to create, revive, and make attractive again that three-dimensional space?
Yours. I mean, everybody's. That's what citizenship means. I mean, I love the word responsibility. That's practically the last word that I use in Road to Unfreedom, because democracy demands a lot of the physical human being. And what we've gotten accustomed to doing is like thinking of surrogates for this, right? Like, so in the US especially, we think, well, capitalism is going to do the work of democracy for us, which is just wrong. Right? There is just no reason to think that that was true. But if the idea that the market is going to bring about democracy means that you and I and everyone else doesn't have to take responsibility for it. So, I mean, it sounds banal and almost naive, but the person who makes democracy attractive is the person who actually goes out and does something for it.
That's why you got to do shit stuff.
In this year when we have actually
you got to
seen
do shit
more
stuff,
citizens
chat. Jesus, my brain
taking to
today.
the streets in many cases, participating actively and in a present way in protest or in activism or in initiatives than we've seen in a long time. Does that in any way counter the trend line that you're talking about?
I mean, I'm one of those people, and I've helped organize some of those marches, and I think it's a really good thing. But A, it's not nearly enough, right? And B, the interesting way that it proves my point, I think, is this. I honestly think we should only use the internet to get ourselves off the internet. And so, if you take, for example, the strikes in Oklahoma, the teacher strikes in Oklahoma, whereas you may not know, like if you're not from this country, but in Oklahoma, public school teachers make 30% less in real terms than they did 10 years ago. It's part of a general crisis in this country. They don't have unions because that's another part of the crisis of this country, but they could strike because of social media. But the point is, you use social media to organize the strike, not to sit at home and say, wouldn't it be cool if we struck, right?
Yes, sir. Right behind you.
Damn.
Thank you,
Hey,
Professor.
Beaster, how you doing?
I don't know if I really understand the cyber politics, the pre-politics of cyber politics. I mean, I understand the liberal one. I mean, an agreement on rules that we are going to abide with, the fascism and communism, them versus us, that it's irreconcilable. So what's the pre-politics of cyber politics that you think conduces us towards fascism?
Yeah, no, thank you. So the way that I was trying to argue this, you have to indulge me if it's a little fuzzy around the edges.
But also the bot will clap you.
I think it's important to try to conceptualize new things and not just kind of wade around and pretend that we're still in the 1990s, because we're not. What I was trying to say was, ideal typically here's liberalism, ideal typically here's fascism or totalitarianism, and then ask about this new environment, which one is it more like? And the answer is, I think the pre-politics of the internet is more like the pre-politics of fascism, because I think when people sit down on the screen, they're expecting to be affirmed. They're expecting to feel like they're part of an us, which starts with the things that they think and feel already, as opposed to actually the two things that liberalism requires, as opposed to actually having to hear the other talk to you, and as opposed to having to interact with the physical world out there, right? So that's here in the cyber world. I think your us comes from the expectation that what you already think and feel can be affirmed. And that's, I don't want to say it's exactly like fascism, because you don't have to get out on the streets, but it seems more like fascism than it does seem like liberalism. And I'm going to give you just a little anecdote about like how I came to this, or part of how I came to this. It was, so I've been canvassing for a long time, talking to prospective voters of both parties for a long time in this country in a lot of states. And one of the things that struck me in 2016 over and over and over again as I talked to hundreds of people was a new discomfort that people had in actually speaking to me.
Yo,
like
Airbnb
that classic
abortion.
Encounter when you're on the doorstep
Thank you for
and somebody says, I'm going to vote
thank
for
you
him,
for
I'm
the
going to vote for him.
$50 dono.
This thing where people
I
didn't
very,
want to
very
look
much
me in the
appreciate
eye,
that.
and where it was
Thank you
almost
so
physically
much.
palpable that they just wanted to run back down to their basement and get back on the computer so they could have their own views recycled back at them again. I realize I can't prove anything this way, but that experience was a very powerful one for me. I mean, actually, I had people tell me, like, I got to get back to my computer now, right? Like, this is lasting too long. Yeah, thanks.
Wow. Yes, I'm sorry, back.
Thanks for that. That was so you mentioned that we're in a position right now of basically being reactive to the reshaping of the spaces like the internet. If I asked you,
None of us can hear your question, ma'am. Unless she's the world's quietest woman. It's so faint.
Uh-huh.
It's such an involved question, too. Fuck. Ma'am, we want to hear you.
Mm-hmm. So this is, I'm gonna take this opportunity to take a better shot at your first question rather than being so
You're gonna march
general.
with the
So,
Lithuanian flag?
one of the
Based.
first things I think we have to do is actually invigorate three-dimensional physical politics. So to treat marching, for example, as something which is normal, to treat strikes as something which is normal, to treat organizations, civil society organizations, which actually meet in the three-dimensional world as something which is normal and necessary, as opposed to something that we're afraid of or seems slightly strange. I think that has to happen. And as you say, there has been some of that in the last year. But to recognize that that's not just nice or some kind of emergency measure, but that may be an essential part of the whole system as we've come to extend it. The second thing, which I know has to happen, and every time I have a conversation with a slightly different demographic than is in this room, I make it their responsibility, and that is...
I think what he's pointing out here is the danger of, like, the creation of spaces in which you are only affirmed in your beliefs and your beliefs aren't challenged, which is a thing that does happen on the internet. The issue is that I'm not sure that it happens as much as he's saying it does, but, like, I can see how that would be a danger, you know?
I believe that young people...
Because if you fall into that, then those spaces can then be manipulated for more, like, authoritarian ends. Do you understand what I mean? Hopefully that makes sense.
have to re-sexualize factuality. I think factuality has to become cool. Factuality has to become, like, the war reporter has to become the hero of the day. The person who actually goes out there and figures things out, as opposed to sits at home and, like, gets things fed through their pupils of what they already believe and has their neural networks messed up. That's what I think we have to have. Like, the notion that it's actually heroic to figure out the world, that it's hard, that you're working against the odds, but that you're actually doing something which is extraordinary. I think that has to happen, the revalorization of factuality. That's a long-term thing, and again, I don't think we can do without that one, because the polarization that that Professor Levitsky was talking so persuasively about, that's a real thing, and you can't. It's very hard to beat it in the world of fiction. The only way to beat it is to slightly enlarge the world of factuality, right? I mean, one way to talk about, as I see it, one way to talk about polarization is the spread of unreality. Right, that there's a certain amount of space in conversation, and the unreality is taking up more and more and more of that space. If we can make unreality take up less of that space, it's more likely that we can have conversations. Then, in terms of how to regulate the internet, there are clearly some ways of thinking about this that could be pursued. Like, do robots have free speech? I don't think so. Right? If I unleash 1,000 social bots, am I engaging in active free speech? I don't believe that I am. I think that has to be seen differently. Is fake news a business activity that should be taxed? I think it is, right? It's entertainment. It creates advertising revenue. I think it should be categrized as such and taxed.
Yeah, this isn't like a sexy lecture. I'll give you guys that one. Don't worry. I'm on your side. But I do think it's valuable.
A bit more ambitiously. If journalism is a profession, then perhaps fake journalism is a negative externality. right? Like if we
I agree with some of his points, not all of them. Like, for example, I think that there are enough good elements in the internet, enough organizing elements in the internet that I think have gone up until this point relatively untapped, at least here in America. And I think that there are people who absolutely do reject honest to God facts in favor of stuff that just makes them feel good. And I think that that is largely what, for example, has given rise to the conspiracy singularity, like this idea that I've talked about for a while, that like all of these conspiracies funnel into each other and into fascism. Like it is, in a sense, connected to that idea that I've been talking about a lot, which is why I think listening to him is valuable. And that's not to say that the entire internet is a conspiracy singularity. It's not. However, that danger is there, and frankly, one of the things we need to do to combat it, and I do genuinely believe this, I think we need to have mandatory media literacy, like in schools. Like, people need to teach the skill of being able to look at a website and ascertain whether what it is saying is true or not. Like, I had one classroom setting lesson on that in middle school, right? And I never had another one, but I went into like English literature. And in English literature, surprisingly, I did not expect this to be like my most applied skill. But in English literature, you have to be able to read with a critical lens. You have to be able to read and understand the text through, you know, the lens of colonialism or the lens of feminism or the lens of Marxism. You have to be able to view it in different ways and interpret in different ways. And I find that that skill is very, very valuable because a lot of people don't understand that it's really, really necessary. And I got to be honest, I also did not understand how necessary it was because I treated my skill set as a given that other people had. And as I've gotten older, I've realized more and more that that is absolutely not the case. What do you think about wearing a face mask to a protest? I have a blue pullover face mask. I plan on wearing it with sunglasses. Good idea. Yeah. It might not help you to like be protected 100% from like facial recognition or whatever, or like camera recognition, but it's better than nothing. Just don't, do anything that would get them interested enough in that wide sea of people. I hope that answers your question, Meow, because like I think that what he's talking about is a more complicated way of looking at and understanding and connecting it to his political philosophy than how I've been describing it, which is just giant conspiracy black hole, like, so I think that he's framing it in kind of a boomery way, but he's talking about the same thing, the same tendency. I always run into situations where people ask me, how do you know that? I'm like, doesn't everybody? Yeah. And like, I don't know. One of the most important things school can teach you is how to think, how to organize your thoughts, how to like seek out better information and incorporate that into your basis for ideas. And it just doesn't do that. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that, and a lot of them are rooted in eugenics, unfortunately. But maybe that'll be a topic for another day. Airbnb Abortion, thank you for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs over on Twitch. And I do not know why none of this is being alerted, but it's alerting over here, so it is going through. Thank you for the 5 tier 1 subs, Airbnb Abortion, and thank you for the $50 donor earlier. And Nerodia, thank you for being a member. And yeah, really appreciate it. Y'all, when you guys support me in that way, you guys keep this show going. And in the near future, I'm gonna be moving, and I need funds to revamp some a storage space in this house so that I can do my gay little politics show in a new studio. I don't know, but the Christians stopped me getting paid. What does that mean? Good night, Meow. You are the star for real. I see this as the obligatory tax. Fuck the IRS. Thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate it, especially after the IRS took a gigantic cut of just the rainy day fund. Oh, that's right. It is Easter weekend. I totally forgot. Can you link the lecture? Absolutely. There you go. Let's finish it up though.
Care about clean water, which we should. Shouldn't we also care about information streams? Is it too much to think that deliberate mendacity, that deliberate production of fake news is a kind of negative externality which should be internalized?
And like what he's talking about here is like there are huge financial incentives to just report fake shit. You know, it's scary. So, yeah.
Or along the same lines, couldn't we make the point that journalism of the real kind has actual costs? You have to employ people and have a staff, whereas just making stuff up does not have costs, and therefore it would be a legitimate.
And what he's talking about here is that like it's way easier to just make shit the fuck up than it is to actually have real information. You know, this is the problem we talk about all the time in leftist circles about how like conservatives can literally just say whatever the fuck they want, whereas like people like me, we have to actually like research and look things up, and it takes like, you know, 30 minutes to debunk something that someone made up in, you know, a fraction of a second.
Intervention in the sense of industrial policy, right? To care about the journalists. And I mean this there's one reason why this is very serious, which I didn't mention, which is local news. So there's an international consensus.
Yeah, and if
that
you
the
make it
death
up,
of
you
local
control what people
reporting
think.
leads to people
Exactly.
talking about, as we've done today, about the media as opposed to reporters. When there are no longer reporters in your little town, then you start to think, this is not about me, this media is not about me, and then you become vulnerable to the conspiracy theories, which we've seen happen in the US. So finding a way to tax or incentivize or whatever, and turn some of that revenue back to supporting local newsmaking. Again, I emphasize that because that's not a reaction, like it's a production of something which we don't need, which we don't have now. And then there are other things one could do on the platforms themselves. Like, what if Facebook asked you what algorithm you had? Like, do you feel like being lied to today? You know, no. You know, do you feel like following investigative? Like, because there's a difference between the stuff that we like when we get it and the stuff that we would choose to have. And the way that Facebook works now is a kind of like ice cream model. Like here's some ice cream, here's some more ice cream, here's some more ice cream. But if I ask you, do you want 5 quarts of ice cream, right? Or do you want a fruit salad? You'd probably say I want a fruit salad, right? So maybe we should have the option at the beginning when we start the interaction to say, I prefer this algorithm. You know, today I want investigative reporters. Tomorrow maybe you can lie to me, but right now I want investigative reporters, right? So there are tweaks that we could make in the interaction itself, I think, that would matter. There's a gentleman over there.
Yes.
Long time ago, I had read an article. I can't remember the author, but now I realize how profound he was. He said, in the human society, we amplified our forces, muscle, and so on with tools. And then we made the tools independent of us, internal combustion engine and so on. Then we extended our senses, and then we've made our senses independent of us.
What if I want 5 quarts of
And
ice
he
cream?
was predicting that there would be a time when we would extend our minds, and then we would delegate our minds. You talked about the cyber world. You talked about artificial.
Can I just say how much I love hearing older folks like this talk about the cyber world? Like it's so, I don't know, it's fascinating, man. It's so interesting to me.
Intelligence algorithms. Are we at a point when we're transitioning our mind to what we have automated and therefore becoming a transitional species?
A trans species, you say?
So,
So
I hope not.
interesting.
So I'm in the us and them, like I have an us and them. I have an us and them, and I'm a human, right? I'm going to lay down my priors right here. I'm a human being.
This must be so bizarre if somebody came in with no context.
I'm a human being. I'm on the side of humans. And what worries me about code, like, so this whole question of like, we're not to the point where see, here's the thing about a historical moment. The robots can't feel, but they can make us feel. We're at an incredible point of vulnerability, because we're not yet at the question, we're not at the point where we have to ask, am I hurting the robot's feelings? But the robot can hurt your feelings anyway. It seems to me that therefore we're at this very powerful asymmetry, right? Where we do stuff in the real world, we're convinced of things by entities that literally are unable to care about us, right? That's where we are, and that's what I find
No, we're not changing our species with tech. We literally are, like, constantly. But that's just a thing that humans do.
Is that darkness on the other side of the screen. So for example, so take for example, like all the people who believed that Hillary Clinton had a pedophilia ring in a pizza restaurant in Washington, D.C.
Oh, God.
They were convinced of that largely because of a cluster of Russian bot activity. And those Russian bots do not care whether a human being then goes to that pizza restaurant and fires a gun, right? To say that they do not care is in some sense an understatement, because of course they can't care. They're just little bits of code out there somewhere in space, right? So the thing which really troubles me about our present condition is that we're all about feeling. You know, we're in a cultural moment where feeling is first, and what the machines are able to do is to figure out in some fairly systematic way how and what we're going to feel, right? So I don't actually think we're delegating our intelligence so much as we're delegating our emotional lives. We're allowing things that aren't us in a profound sense to tell us who we are. That's what worries me, something slightly different. So I mean, I'm happy to talk about that other dystopia. I don't think that's where we are right now.
I think it is the mark of a great conference when you both answer questions and then you turn answers into questions. Thank you, Professor Snyder, for giving us so much to think about.
That was fun. I enjoyed that. We should do this more often. Next up, of course, we have Richard Wolff talking about how crises lead themselves to moments of opportunity. Maybe we can make a difference here. Huh? Let's move on. Olympians, thank you for the $5 dono. Very knifey duck. Thank you for the $5 dono. Again, I'm not sure why it's not reading off your donations. Sorry about that, folks.
Let me begin by saying a few basic things about economics, just so we're all on the same page, and because since I do a lot of speaking around the country, I have come to learn the bitter lesson that whatever passes for economics education in the United States is right up there with education in nuclear physics. In other words, there isn't much, and most people don't get it. And so they turn away from economics, a little bit like people turn away from mathematics and subjects like that are basically presented so badly that the student feels it's his or her fault and doesn't want to go there. So I'm not saying that happened to any of you, but it might have. And it might be helpful if we all started on the same page with some basic economics. Okay. So bear with me, this is simple, but it is more important to get it clear than you might imagine. Human beings are a little different from most other creatures.
Are we good on
On
volume?
this planet, because instead of simply looking and hoping to find what sustains us, food,
Hey,
shelter,
Malachi. How you
on.
doing?
We make it. We are human beings who use our brains and muscles to shape, to control our environment, and to take care of ourselves. And to make a long story short, we work. We use our brains and muscles to transform the things we find in nature, to put them in a new and different form that pleases us, that satisfies us. We take a tree and we make a table. We take a cotton plant and we make a shirt, and so on. And human beings, for as long as we have a human record, have been doing that. They have been working to produce goods and services out of nature to satisfy and take care of themselves.
It's true.
What has happened over the history of the human race is how we've organized that. We've done that very differently. For example,
Isn't Richard Wolff a Marxist economist? You are correct.
for much of the history of the human race, human beings did this individually or in very small groups, a family. That is, we went to work as individuals or very small groups, used our brains and muscles to produce the goods and services we consumed. We grew the vegetables. We cared for the animals. We found a way to get clothing by taking the fur of an animal, and so on. We built a little house, a shack, a lean-to, whatever.
Hey,
that
that
was true
lean-to
for
was really important to
Tens
me.
of thousands of years of human life. Individual, small groups, and even if they clump together in something bigger, each of the little groups within the something bigger functioned this way. Then at a certain point in human history, something monumental happened. Many reasons, and we call that nowadays a division of labor. It stopped being the case that everybody produced all of what he or she needed. We began to specialize. It's what we all take for granted now. This one becomes the baker of the bread. This one becomes the spinner of the wool. This one becomes the builder of the house. This one becomes the school teacher. You know the rest of it. And that's fine. We specialize, all kinds of reasons. But what I want to focus you on is that when we specialize, we have a new problem, which we didn't have when we didn't specialize as human beings. Because if you don't specialize, if each of us produces pretty much what us, myself, my little family, my little group, if we produce what we consume, we don't have to worry about something economists call distribution. But if I produce only one thing and you produce something else and she produces still something else, then we have to come up with a way of distributing what each of us produces to one another, or else I'll be great at making ladders, but I'll die tomorrow because I have no food. You will have a lot of food, but you won't be able to get up the tree to harvest the apples above what you can reach because you don't have a ladder. So there has to be a distribution system, some way to parcel out amongst all of us what we each specialize in producing. And the human race has been very creative in how to do that.
It's true, we
What lasted
have.
most in human history was a kind of ritual of doing that. It became a kind of social ritual, maybe a religious ritual. For example, terms like harvest.
A really good example of this, by the way, is the ritual in feudalism of carving the meat. There's a reason why around your Thanksgiving table, by the way, that there's a sense of honor associated with carving meat. Largely because it was heavily ritualized, and in some cases, like, a feudal lord could be, killed for carving the meat wrong. It could facilitate, like, rebellion against him. It would be perceived as a colossal slight. Yeah, ritualistic meat handling. It's a thing. It's a thing. And an example of what he's talking about here.
Is when we gather the fruits of our different labors. You get the corn, you get the eggs, you get the meat, whatever it is, and then we have a festival.
Boy, watching this in 2025 and hearing him drop eggs, oh boy. Yeah, don't you drop those eggs. They're literally worth a fortune.
Festival, all cultures have harvest festivals where they distribute, where we work out, I'm going to give you the eggs that I don't need myself, and you're going to give me the carrots that you don't need, and you the wheat, and you the rice, and all the rest of it. Other systems were also developed. A group of elders, that's very popular in human history, older people who've lived around a long time and kind of know what's going on, they get together and they parcel out amongst all of us what each of us specializes in producing. And so we get the distribution that way. Sometimes it isn't an elder, it's just a kind of rule, a custom that develops. For example, in your family, when you do a certain kind of labor, say around a Thanksgiving Day table, and you variously do things. Maybe your mother prepares the turkey and you do the mashed potatoes, and your brother does the cranberry sauce or whatever. And then the question is, each of you has made something, but your Thanksgiving is not going to see you groveling in the cranberry sauce as your activity. You'd like some turkey and you'd like some potatoes. And so a method works out. Maybe the method is grandma hands it out. Maybe your father does it. Very interesting how it gets worked out, family by family, who's in the position of deciding. And you know, you remember when you were a kid, you had a problem. You wanted 2 chocolate puddings at the end of the meal, and that became a tension as to who would get the extra dessert. You, your cousin, your uncle, grandma, grandpa, whoever. That has to be worked out. That is a distributional problem, okay? Then a few 100 years ago, we began to do this distribution in a very peculiar way. It had happened before, but it had been sporadic. But starting about 300-400 years ago, 500 years ago, depending on when you count, in the western part of the world, Europe and so on, a development happened that organized a new way of distributing the goods that were specially made by different people. And that way was called the market. The market is a peculiar arrangement. Here's how it works. You make a bunch of stuff, bread or shirts or whatever, and you come to a particular place at a particular time, the edge of the village at 5 o'clock on Thursdays, and you open a little blanket and you lay out the stuff you've done, the eggs you have, the chicken, the shirts, the whatever. And along come people who likewise came to market with whatever they made, baskets or chairs or whatever. And a peculiar ritual develops in which you and the other person bargain, a new word. I'll give you 4 of my shirts if you give me 6 loaves of bread. I'll give you 2 of my oranges if you give me a pound of your coffee or whatever it is. And the distribution happens through lots and lots of individual bargainings. That's called a market system. It is a way of distributing goods and services when you have a division of labor. It has not been the way we've divided goods and services for most of the history of the human race. We had other ways. Elders did it. Priests did it. Religious rituals accomplished it. The market is relatively new, and the market as a system has always been fought over. It was never instituted as some great acclamation of the best thing to do. Not at all. If you go back, some of you do some reading, if you go back and you study Plato and Aristotle, way back in ancient Greece, there were market arrangements among, if you know the history a little bit, the different Greek city-states, Athens, Sparta, and the other ones. They would trade with one another. Trade is another word for market, because trade is, I'll give you 3 of these, you give me 2 of those. And so the question arose, gee, in a society like Athens, where Plato and Aristotle did their work, what will be the impact on our society, which is mostly people producing for themselves and consuming their own stuff? Or if there's specialization, the leaders of Athens, the democratically elected leaders, would divide things up. What will happen if we don't have the old system, But we have this new distribution system, the market. And you may be surprised to learn that Plato and Aristotle, ready, hated markets, denounced them. And why? Because they destroyed the community. When people are at each other, constantly fighting, I'll give you 3 of these, but I want 6 of those, you just want to give me 5, I'm going to go find somebody else who's going to... This kind of relationship, this kind of haggling at every moment in which we interact with one another, such that I want to give you the least possible and get from you the most possible, was a disruptive, asocial human activity that should be banned. So I always love it when people start with a speech about our great forefathers, intellectual giants of the great Western tradition, Aristotle and Plato, and then work seamlessly into a celebration of the status quo. We live in a market society. They hated market societies. And they're not the only ones. It's been disputed ever since. It's been disputed now. I just say that because before you take it that markets have always existed, they haven't. Human beings have done real well, thank you, for a long time without them. And when they came, they were fought over. To imagine that everybody today could or should or would agree with a market system simply not means you don't.
I think he is making a distinction here between trading and markets as like a distribution. Like, I think he's talking about markets as a method of distributing goods in here, and he juxtaposed that with like a Thanksgiving dinner. That makes sense. Yeah, I think that'd be a bad system of government. Superjet guy.
Don't know much
Good night,
history.
Airbnb abortion.
Okay, so we have markets. Next step, how is it all organized? Well, we live in a peculiar system that is not only market arranged, but we have a very peculiar way of organizing the...
He said trade was just another way of accomplishing a market. Yeah. I'd be interested to hear him elaborate more on this, so let's keep going.
Production of goods and services that are then traded and distributed by means of a market. How do...
Oh, traded and distributed by means of a market. Gotcha. So you can trade without the means of a market.
How do we do it? Well, let's see. We have work to produce a shirt, a microphone, a briefcase, a camera, anything. It takes lots of different people coordinated, doing various parts of the job to produce a finished good. How do we organize that in our economic systems in the history of the world? Lots of ways. Sometimes people got together, understanding that, look, I can only do a certain amount myself. If I want to do something more complicated than the things I can do myself, I'm going to have to hook up with other people to be able to get that more complicated thing done, like a bridge or a house. Hard to build a house with 1 or 2 people. You need a kind of a bunch, and it takes a lot of time. So how are you going to organize this? How's it going to work? And human beings have done it in a variety of ways, very quickly. One is just you get a group of people together and you agree amongst yourselves, we're going to work together. Each of us is going to work for 6 months. Each of us is going to work, 5 hours a day, and then we're going to build something like a barn. And we'll start by building a barn for you, Harry. And when we're done, we'll build a barn for you, Mary. And Mary, you'll help building the house for Harry, and Harry, you'll help building the house for, and so we work it out. In that arrangement, we work it all out together. We sit around, have meetings. How are we going to build the barn? Who's going to be built first? How's it go? And we work out a plan, and then we all more or less abide by the plan. And if anyone thinks out,
I think Richard Wolff is great.
Usual modes of persuasion.
I don't agree with him on like everything, and sometimes he'll come out of left field, like on Ukraine, and just be real out of pocket. But on a lot of economic stuff, I think he's pretty good.
that people have developed, everything from a nice conversation to a nasty gossip and whatever else is necessary to get the work done. That's a collective, you might call it, a community way of organizing.
What's his Ukraine stance? I don't want to go into it. His Ukraine stance is like, Russia should take it. Which, and I'm very much simplifying it. But I don't think it's great. But he has solid economic theory.
Or you might take that
Keep in mind, he's an economist. He's not a geopolitical scientist.
another word that comes out of the same root of community and call it, I don't know, communist. That'd be one. It's a community. That's one way. Have people done that in the history of the world? Always. Ancient times, medieval times, and last week. I can tell you all around the United States and elsewhere, that kind of work gets done in that way. Okay? Second, a completely different way. In this second way,
Yeah, it's
people
exactly that
do
piece of
all
do.
the work, and other
About
people
NATO.
don't. Wow. Let's do that again. Some people do all the work, and other people don't. I'll give you one example. It's a society that organizes people into two groups just to get it working like this. One group is called slaves, and the other group is called masters. And there's a lot of ways this comes into being, but we have lots of examples in history of a part of society called the slave and a part of society called the master. The slave is the property of the master, rather like a horse might be, or a chair, or a house. We allow, in those kinds of societies, human beings to be the property of other human beings. And then the master, owning the slave, having dominion over the slave as a property, can treat that slave pretty much as he sees fit. And he says to the slave, I have an idea. You do all the work. You build the house, you make the shirt, you cook the omelet. And you do not only do that so that you yourself can survive, that is, you cook an omelet, you eat, you make a shirt, you wear, that's fine. But you're going to have to do, ready, more than that. You're going to have to do more work than is what taking care of you, because that's what you're going to have to give to me, which will allow me to have an omelet, a shirt, and a chair, and I'm not going to do nothing. You'll do it for me, or else I'm the master. It's a very peculiar arrangement, because it means that right in the production process, instead of us all getting together to work together to produce what we all need, we are introducing a big new difference. Conflict, tension, anger, resentment. Why? Because some people are doing all the work and producing more than they get. A more that we nowadays call the surplus, the extra. What is produced by workers when they produce more than they themselves consume. Slaves produce a surplus that masters get. Masters use it not only to have a lovely lifestyle, but to make sure that this system continues because they like it. But the slaves don't. Not so much. And the reason shouldn't be hard for you to figure out. They're getting, to use a technical term in economics, screwed. Big time. Then there's another system. By the way, slavery systems last a long time. They exist all over the world. They have nothing to do with any particular race. Americans tend to think that slavery has something to do with black people because in America we happen to have that particular arrangement. But slaves have existed in all continents and come in all colors, just like masters have likewise come in all colors. There's no correlation between race and slavery. Never was. There's no need to be parochial about it. Third arrangement, different. Here again, it's interesting. Some people produce a surplus other people get. But the people producing the surplus are not slaves. They're nobody's property. We call this kind of a system with a different name, just to keep it clear in our minds. We call it feudalism. It's sort of what existed in Europe from around 500 AD to around 1500 AD. No more slaves, nobody owns anybody. But a serf is a person who gets born in a particular piece of land and by custom, by religion, by the law, stays there. You're born, most people, as the child of a serf. You are therefore also a serf, and you owe an obligation to the Lord, to some big shot in the area. Those of you who've ever visited Europe, you'll make tourism your activity. You'll be taken to chateaus. That's the French word for, in English, castle, or a German word, Schloss. Like, these are different words, but they're about where the Lord lived, the feudal lord. And here's how it worked.
Oh, Duck Authority.
If you're a serf,
I can't see
you
links
worked
that you
3
share
days on
in
the
chat
land, and the fruit of that
because we
work
have
you did was
like
yours to
moderation
keep.
settings that prevent me from
Monday,
seeing them.
Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you went to another piece
What
of
are you
land
trying to
and you
link?
worked. That was the land of the Lord. And whatever you produced those second 3 days was his. You went back home. And on the 7th day, you rested. And you know what institution presided over that? The Roman Catholic Church in Europe presided over feudalism. You went to church on the 7th day, and you rested. And then you resume next week. So the serfs produced in the first 3 days for themselves. In the second 3 days, the surplus that allowed those chateaus to look so grand. You ever been to Versailles outside of Paris? You'll see just how grand it can be if you have hundreds of thousands of serfs working for you, which Louis the XIV, or whichever one it was, had when he built the chateau at Versailles. Now we come to the next. Just notice, these are different ways in which we have specialization, and we have production organized in different arrangements among human beings. Feudalism was overthrown after 1,000 years. It lasted a long time. Overthrown
Too
1500s, 1600s, 1700s. About when? In Europe. Overthrown. The serfs had it. The problems of the lords, together with the anger and resentment of the serfs, blew the thing up. The most famous moment, the French Revolution.
I did not turn off CCs. For whatever reason, it's just not registering him. Maybe it doesn't speak New Yorker.
Of 1789, when the angry masses of the French people grabbed Marie Antoinette out of her castle, her feudal castle, and cut off her head to make a point. And it happened in other parts of Europe as well. And a new system came in. And this new system we now call capitalism. It's the one we still have. It's about 300 or 400 years old. That's all. Which, as systems go, is kind of young. Been around a while. How does it work? Well, it's different from slavery because we don't allow people to own one another. And it's different from serfdom because we don't say if you're born over here to a serf, that's it, you're a serf too. We allow much more, and this is very big, individual liberty and mobility.
Earlier, it registered
no matter who you're
intense
born
sneeze.
to, I mean, do what you can. And here's how that system works. Everybody looks for what he or she is going to do. Those of you that are young are in that process now. Where am I going to go to school? What am I going to study? What course am I going to take? Who am I going to study? What credential, what mechanism to find a place in the division of labor? What am I going to do? Some of you worry a lot about it. You even pay people to advise you how to do it. You go to an institution that promises you that if you go there and you do real well and you take the exams and you get the course credit and you get the degree, then you'll get a job. That's not happening anymore, but many of you haven't figured that out yet, and the hope of the system is you never will. But the smarter ones among you have already noticed, and the rest of you will find out soon enough. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes.
Sad day.
How does this capital...
This lecture, by the way, is from 12 years ago? Yeah, 12 years ago, just as an FYI.
This system work. It's interesting. Here's how it works. The vast mass of people, here we go now, look for a job, which, by the way, they take as axiomatic, as the way life is. Even though, in fact, if you follow what I've said, that's not been the way life is at all. The child of a slave knew exactly what he or she was going to do, didn't need a school, didn't need an advisor. They were going to be a slave too, likely to the same master or the children of the master. The serf knew where he, she would be, what their lives would be like. No confusion there. No anguished adolescence trying to figure out what I'm going to do with myself. No problem. Capitalism brings you that dilemma because it's kind of open-ended. So you go around looking for a job. Now let's look at that for a minute. When you look for a job, you're actually looking for someone to do something to, with, for, or at you. I'll leave it to you to decide which preposition to use. You look for a boss. You look for someone to do something remarkable with you, to hire you, to engage you, to employ you. A serf never did that. A slave never did that. People who got together collectively did it. Nobody hired anybody else for the vast majority of the history of the human race. That is a very...
Oh yeah, David Graeber's lecture on debt, the first 5,000 years, I think dovetails very nicely with this lecture in particular. And I would very much recommend people check out David Graeber's book, Debt, the first 5,000 years, because that video is based on his book, and the book is very, very good too.
Peculiar arrangement. And here's how it goes. You go to an employer, you say, here I am. I just graduated from MIT. Look at how white my teeth are. Please give me a job. I am very good at whatever.
Can I have a link to this?
The employer will do that. That's why you went there. You're having an interview. And you have a conversation. And you talk about the work you'll be expected to do, the work you would like to do, all of that bullshit. And then you come to the key moment. How much am I going to get paid? Because you need the money. Why? Because you need to buy a lot of things in order to avoid painful death. Food you need.
I would like to avoid a painful death. Please donate, subscribe, and like the stream.
You don't have much, right? So you need food, you need underpants because it's polite. And
help me to afford underpants, shit.
And you don't make those yourselves, most of you, so you need money to acquire them. And the job you're going to get is going to give you the money to buy
Agard,
the
too.
things
Thank you for the 5
that will
gifted
allow
tier
you
1
to
subs over
survive
on
at
Twitch.
least and have a pleasant life.
Hell
maybe,
yeah.
if you're
That's what
lucky
I like
at
to
best.
see. Answering calls to
So
action.
you enter into that key part of the conversation. How much,
Good night,
dear
Erica.
Mr. or Ms. Employer, are you going to give me? And this is a very interesting moment. And let's say you agree on something. Let's say you agree to be paid $20 an hour, or an annual salary that works out to $20 an hour, or 30, or it doesn't make any difference, but let's stay with 20. It's a nice round number. So the employer agrees to pay you $20 an hour. And you must agree in return to do a number of things. That's how this system works. Number one, you agree to come 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. You have to come. You have to be reasonably well.
You have to come. Matt Yahoo, thank you for the $5 dono. Not dying a horrible death and underpants fund. Thank you.
Well dressed. You have to be able to apply your brains and muscle. And you have to be willing to do what you're told to do with whatever the raw materials are there for you to work on and whatever tools and equipment are there for you to work with. And one more thing.
And
really
one
crucial.
more thing.
At the end of the 8 hours, typically, that you've used your brains and muscles in the way you've been told to, on the raw materials you've been given, you will have transformed those raw materials. Remember what I said at the beginning. Something provided by nature, you will have worked up into something else. Whatever the product is that your employer produces, a good or a service, whichever. And here comes the crucial thing. At the end of the day, that your work is embedded, embodied in the finished product that you've been told to produce, you must go home and leave the product of your work there. You made it, but you don't get it. And if you take a little of it home with you, The employer calls those men in blue uniforms and they come to your house and they hurt you to help you understand, no, no, no. You make this stuff, then you go home. At home, you drink beer, take off your shoes, go to sleep watching boring television so that you're in shape tomorrow morning to do it all again. Okay?
Hey, don't call me out like that.
The employer
Don't call me
takes
out like
the
that.
fruits of your labor.
Also, anime is not boring. You take that back. You take that back, Dick Wolff.
And the employer decides what to do with it. Now, the most important point of all. The only way, the only time, the only circumstance on which an employer will ever give you $20 an hour, or 30, or 60, or 100, doesn't make any difference. One condition has to be met. During that hour that the employer pays you X worth of money, your labor has to produce for the employer more than X worth of extra stuff for him to sell. Why? Because otherwise there's nothing in it for him. If he pays you $20 an hour, and your hour's worth of work produces another $20 worth of whatever the product of that company is, which he sells for $20, what's he got? He sold for $20, used the money to pay you, he's got squat. And much as he likes you and his fellow man and woman, it's not going to happen. So there's one condition in capitalism under which you will get a job. You will have to produce more for your employer than the employer pays you. So for those of you that have been saying to one another, I'm not going to work for anybody who doesn't pay me what I'm worth, you don't understand this system. That's not going to happen. You're in the wrong country at the wrong time historically. That's more likely for you to be hit by lightning than to discover that situation. You are always going to be ripped off in your job in capitalism because that's the way the system works. But don't worry, there are a lot of people, including lots of economics professors, who will give you one story after another instead of what I just told you, so that you don't get distressed while you're being ripped off, because it might make you resist, which we can't have that. But in capitalism, it turns out we've got exactly the same kind of system as we had in slavery and feudalism. Why? Because the worker has to produce more, a surplus, than he gets, which goes to somebody else.
The
It's
Fine
the
Print by
employer who sells
Stipendium.
the
I love that song. That song's great. 10 out of 10. Stipendium is a great channel.
hours worth of output you help produce for $40 and pays you $20. And what's left over, he gets, just as the master got the surplus the slave produced, or the feudal lord got the surplus that the serf produced. One of the great insights of the most profound thinkers about capitalism is that capitalism wasn't the end of slavery or feudalism, it's a changed form of them. No more slave, no more serf, but surplus being produced by one part of the population, enabling another part to live off of it, that hasn't changed at all. And that means what also hasn't changed is in the heart of the capitalist system is a conflict, a tension, an opposition, a resentment, an anger, and a bitterness between those who are constantly producing more than they get and those who live off that difference. And if you're a capitalist, an employer, what of course is your interest? To give the worker the least possible while getting the most out of them, because that's the biggest surplus they can get. And the more surplus they have, the more secure they'll be. It's the same problem the slave master had in relationship to the slave, or the feudal lord in relationship to the serf. So for those of you that have already worked in your lives and wondered why, at the end of many a day, you felt somehow ripped off, it's because you were. And if you tried to find a place where you could shake off this sense of being ripped off, you found one. The neighborhood tavern that offered you at the end of your day a happy hour that you know was there, and given that name, precisely because it was in a remarkable way different from all the preceding hours, wasn't it? So even a society like ours that doesn't want to face or admit any of this, does it despite itself, can't help itself. Capitalism is a system premised on what Marx called exploitation, which he defined very simply and very carefully. Exploitation exists if and when the people who do the work produce a surplus that other people get and distribute as they see fit. That's why slavery is one kind of exploitation, feudalism is another, and capitalism is a third. What's the alternative? I already told you at the beginning of this little monologue. That's when the people who produce the surplus, the workers, are themselves the people who get the surplus. How would that work? Take any factory, take any office, take any store in America today, here in New York. Change it as follows. No more board of directors. Most things are done by corporations that are run by a board of directors. No more board of directors. Don't need it.
Matsuyahu, that is also why I really appreciate him. He explains things to me like I'm a moron. And, you know, frankly, I don't think so highly of myself that I disagree that I need that sometimes, you know? I think it's good to be humbled a little bit, and he humbles me in my understandings. And again, don't always agree, but, like, dude's smart as shit.
Here's how we're going to do it. Monday to Thursday, where all the workers come to work and do what they were always doing. You cook bread, you clear the table, you set the table, you do the dishes, whatever, if it's a restaurant, say. Friday, we have a different arrangement. You come to work, half of you, and you do your regular job, and the other half of you sit around making the decisions. The menu, the investment, the redecorate, all the decisions that used to be made by the capitalist, the boss. The following week, the group of you that had meetings all day Friday last week, you do the work in the restaurant, and the other half of the workers have a meeting instead where they go over these decisions. Workers become their own board of directors. Workers become their own capitalists. Or to say the same thing another way, the worker-capitalist division dissolves. Is that an alternative? Of course it is. Do we have examples of that in history? Loads. Do we have examples of that in the United States today? Loads.
Loads.
Do we understand it as an alternative to capitalism? No, 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 no. No, 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 no. People like me, our economics professors, are very carefully trained to avoid explaining any of this to you. That's what we are. I don't say this for the obvious reasons that you will expect, but I will tell you. I went to Harvard, then I went to Stanford, and my PhD in economics is from Yale. So I'm a poster boy for the education I just described. Major, mediocre. An education designed to give you a very different understanding of how this system works from the one I just gave you. The one I just gave you comes from the work of Karl Marx. Uh-oh. And in my education, we were kept as far away from Karl Marx as you were from certain parts of the town you grew up in where you were supposed to never go, especially not in the evening. And for us, Marx was, I don't know if any of you saw it, I was on that television program last week, Charlie Rose, and he asked me questions about my education at those institutions, and he could not believe, because he didn't want to, that I didn't get much of an education in Marxism, exactly zero in those places, because they were afraid. Marxism tells you this is a system that leaves a lot to be desired and has an awful lot of problems. Whereas we're supposed to believe, aren't we, that we live in an economic system that really is about the best thing since sliced bread, works like a charm, is the best thing the human being could ever come up with, and therefore, shut up. Well, it's one way of organizing an education, but it's not the one that I like. Having said that, let me move into the real topic for today, which is the economic crisis. And here's the connection. Up until 2 or 3 years ago, most of the kinds of talks I would give, because of the pedigree I have, I get invited. Because I've been a professor all my life, I get invited. We call the academic world, people like me, protective coloring. It's like a pheasant that has those feathers. You don't see it quite for what it is. Aha. So
I love the way he
what has
talks.
happened
It's
to
so
change
like
all-
he's such
why
a silly
would
little
person
goose.
like me be on the Charlie Rose program last Thursday? How did that happen? That happened because the capitalist system that we've had for several hundred years has, in the last 75 years, stumbled badly. The first time was in the 1930s, when it really crashed. We call it the Great Depression. Started in 1929, and we weren't done until 1941. And we weren't really done then, because what finally put people back to work after 11 years of horrible unemployment. Footnote, we are currently in year 5 of the current one. So for those of you that think will be over soon, maybe, but maybe not. The last one we had like this lasted 11 years, and we never got all the people back to work until the thing that happened right after 1941, which we call World War II, where we took all the remaining unemployed, millions of them in America, we divided them into 2 groups. Half of them got a uniform, and the other half got a job making the uniform. That's what we did. That's what we did. That's how we solved the problem. Okay, I said 2 big stumbles. What's the other one? We're in it. In 2007, a crisis crashed down on capitalism that has made all the glib predictions about how this economic system is an engine of progress, an engine of prosperity, a mechanism for efficiency. All of that looks very poorly now, doesn't it?
Because we're all poor, get it? Haha.
Well, it should. In 2007, the number of people officially counted unemployed in the United States was about 7.5 million. Today, that number is 15 million. You notice anything? It got worse. Over the last 4 years, several million Americans have been thrown out of their homes by a legal procedure called foreclosure, which means in America today we have a remarkable achievement of capitalism. On the one hand, several millions of people who are homeless, and on the other hand, several million homes that are empty. They stare at each other. There's efficiency for you. Millions of people without work. What do they want? A job. Let's see. Is there machinery, equipment, and raw materials for them to work with and on? The Federal Reserve keeps a number called the capacity utilization rate, the proportion of our industrial capacity that is being used as opposed to the portion that is sitting there gathering rust and dust. What's it currently at? Well, depending on who you listen to, the consensus number, around 79%. So something like 21% of the tools and equipment are sitting there. Okay, let's do this now. Millions of people who want a job don't have one. All the tools, equipment, and raw materials one could ever want for them to work with. And guess what? If we put the people who want a job together with the equipment and the raw materials, they would produce lots and lots of, let's see the word, wealth, which we could use to solve our social problems, rebuild our cities, help the poor, give money to other countries. We could do a lot of wonderful things with the wealth that could be produced by the people who are unemployed but want a job, working with the stuff that's gathering rust and dust. Capitalism is an engine of progress and prosperity. What planet are you on? What did you drink?
I love him. I love
to
him
have
so
such
much.
a view. So when a system is as badly performing as this one, and we're now in year 5, the current downturn is dated to have begun in December of 2007. So we're in the 5th year, and there's no end in sight. 2 days ago, the government announced that the rate of economic growth in the last quarter was much lower than they had hoped. It's 1.5% instead of over 2%. And the one thing that means is we're not growing jobs as fast as young people are entering the labor force, which means not only are we not putting the unemployed back to work, we don't even have enough jobs for the new people coming in. This is not a system that's working real well. This is a system that is working real badly. So, in the remaining time I have, I'm going to use the theory that I've described to you a little bit to try to explain to you and answer one overarching question. Why is this crisis so bad? Why is it lasting so long? Why is there no end in sight? Okay, big questions. And before I start, let me just remind you, because I'm a professional economist all my life, I've had to pay attention, this crisis was not supposed to happen. My generation was told that having gone through the Great Depression of the 1930s, we learned the lessons to make sure that nothing like that would ever come back to plague the young people of the future, and so we were okay. It was so repeated, this nonsense, that even the courses that once existed in American universities, as recently as the 1940s and 50s, courses that were mandatory for econ majors, called the history of crises, the business cycle, where students could at least learn to take a look at what had happened, to see what the governments tried when things got bad, what worked, so they'd have some idea. By the 60s, we didn't need those anymore. We didn't have crises. One of the reasons the government is so wonderfully adept at screwing everything up is because they don't know what to do in this situation. It wasn't supposed to happen. When it hit in 2007, the first thing our then president said, George W. Bush, oh, this is a minor crisis in the housing market. It'll be over in 6 months. 6 months later, being the kind of president he was, he said it again. And Obama basically repeats, with variation, the same story. They're using the same advisors, the same economists sitting at the top of the system, a collection of remarkable people we can perhaps discuss a little later, but they don't know what they're doing, and it shows. They have one solution after the first stimulus would solve the problem. It didn't. The second stimulus would really do it. Didn't do it either. We're now waiting for the third one, which will come later this year. The Federal Reserve doesn't know what to do with that, brought interest rates down to virtually zero. In a number of countries, in case you don't follow this, the interest rates are negative. You know what that means? That means if you borrow $100 from the bank, you are required at the end of the year to give them 99. Let me do that again. The bank pays you to lend them money. Excuse me, the bank pays you to lend you money. It's remarkable. System isn't working. It's a disaster. And there's no end in sight.
Disaster.
And I'm not going to bore you because I hope you understand it. If you have millions and millions of people unemployed, you have staggering social problems. Every index, physical disease, mental disease, school children having problems in school, breakup of romantic relationships and marriages, everything goes like this with rising unemployment. People interrupt their educations, never to go back. The long-term effects of this kind of economic breakdown last for decades. The psychological effects, more. The costs are incalculable of all of this. Try to understand what a child goes through if one or both of the parents lose their job. Even if they don't, they have to be forced out of their house with a sheriff who comes and takes your furniture and puts it out on the street, where you have to be wrenched out of your set of friends to go to another school in another place. Just do it. Think. We are imposing this on tens of millions of people in this country and abroad. Okay, so why? Why did it happen? Why did it last so long?
Sounds hauntingly
First part
familiar,
of the story, and I
right?
promise you, this is the only time I'll draw anything on the board.
Cozy, it's
And
home,
the ideas
you
here
know?
are so simple that nothing will be difficult for you to understand. I promise. Okay. We're going to look at the history of the United States, because one of the key reasons why this crisis is so bad is because it is a kind of culmination, as you're going to see in a minute, of the history of the United States. It's not just another one of the business cycles. Oh, by the way, footnote. Capitalism is a highly unstable system. It has business cycles every few years.
Yep.
Between the great crash of the 1930s, 1929 to 1941, and the beginning of the current crisis, 2007, in that interval, 11 other business downturns. I tell a joke in all my classes at the universities where I teach. If you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out years ago or demanded that your roommate get professional help. But you stay in an economic system that is exactly the same, and you imagine it's your job to adapt. How interesting. You should wonder why you do that and why you think like that. So it's a highly unstable system. But clearly the ups and downs, which on average last a year or two, sometimes have a disastrous kind of downturn, and we're in one of those now. Second major collapse of capitalism globally in 75 years, with 11 in between. If we weren't an ideologically befuddled country, would we have allowed there to be no national debate about capitalism as a system? Given all the other systems I've talked to you about, and there are many more that I didn't. A sane society would have said, whoa, with a performance like this, we ought to at least have a conversation. Could the United States do better than capitalism? Think of it. We're a society that are proud, aren't we? We've debated our education system, made major changes. We allow charter schools, we allow private schools, we have debates over that. We have debates over what curriculum should be. Half the country teaches creationism, and the other half evolution, and all the rest. All the rest. We fight over. We debate our transportation system. We just spent 2 years debating the medical insurance system of the United States. Should we have a single-payer system? Should we have a government-funded system? Should we have only a private system? You know, you've all been in on it. Came to a head again when the Supreme Court decided to validate the Obamacare bill, et cetera, et cetera. We've discussed most of the systems that make up American society over the last 50 years. By the way, we even debate what is marriage. Geez, would have thought that was kind of sacrosanct. Now we have marriage between people of opposite sex, people of the same sex, under each other, whoop, we can do it, we can have the debate. But there's one thing there's no debate over. The economic system. It's a complete taboo for 50 years. Republicans and Democrats stumble over each other to be cheerleaders for the system. There's no debate, there's no question, there's no room for people to say, hey, this system stinks. Or, hey, we could do better. How about this? What about this? No, no, no. Capitalism? Wonderful. Isn't it wonderful? Oh, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, they gush. What is this? This is childish. This is a fear-ridden society that is so frightened that no matter how badly this system works, no debate, no conversation. In the 5 years of capitalism's grotesque dysfunction of the last 5 years, no single person, including the few heroes that many of you had, Bernie Sanders, any of them, have been willing to say, the system doesn't work well. The system has to, it's not a question of finding the bad guy and punishing him, the banker who did something nasty, the poor person who borrowed money when he or she couldn't afford a house. Left-wingers have their bad guys, right-wingers have their bad guys, and we want to put them all in jail. What does that do? It simply means that if you take Jamie Dimon at Morgan Stanley and you fire him, his next of, I was about to say kin, his next of bureaucracy will take his place, and be subject to the same system with its rewards, its incentives, and its punishments. If you ask people on the hedge fund business, and I know them real well, why they do what they do, their answer is real simple. Because I'll lose my job if I don't do that. And they're right, that's exactly right. And it's true for all of them. They're behaving according to the rules of the system. And when people behave by the rules of the system, and bad result, it ain't the behavior that's the problem. It's the system, which normally people could think about, but not here. Here we have a taboo. We can't. Strange. You ought to wonder about that and how it's shaped your life. Now let's do a history quickly to show why this crisis is so bad. And we're going to start with 1850. We could go back further. The basic story here is that for the first 150 years, roughly, of our country's history, these two lines went up nicely together. The lower line is a measure of the real wage Americans got. How much money you got for an hour's work, a day's work, a week's work, adjusted for the prices you pay. Because it's not interesting that you have so much money unless that can buy you the things you need. So the real wage is a measurement of the money wage you get adjusted for the prices you pay. So if it rises like this from the beginning of our country to around the 1970s, which is what it did, then we have to explain that. That's really interesting. Real wages, what you were able to afford with the wages you were paid, rose steadily in this country for 150 years, at least. That's really interesting for several reasons. One, no other capitalist country was able to do that. Wow. American workers experienced something in American capitalism that workers in capitalisms in England, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, or any place else you pick, didn't. For 150 years. Of course, Americans became, there's a wonderful German word, begeistert. It has no English translation. What? Okay, astounded. It's not quite what I want, but close enough. It's as good as I can do. They became, what? No. That's a different issue. Okay, let me stay with English, my mistake. Wages went up, and Americans became absolutely entranced, there we go, with this phenomenon. Religious Americans believed, clearly, that God obviously preferred us to other people, because look what he was doing. Well, and Americans lived in a charmed place, and this is the greatest country in the world, you know, what every American politician has to say to get elected. I'm the greatest country, obnoxious, right? But we do that because there's partly part of our culture, this is really, and it is exceptional. That's part is right. And Americans got this idea, every generation lives better than the one before. I'm better off than my parents, my kids will be better off than me, and somehow built in. What was going, why? Why did we have 150 years of wages rising? The answer here is really fundamentally very simple. We had in this country a problem. Everything we needed for a successful capitalist growth was here. We got rid of the local people so there were no competitors. We ethnically cleansed the country. Those that were not dead were put in little reservations off in a corner. You know the story, or you should. Fantastically fertile soil, wonderful climate, 2 oceans, lots of harbors, rich with rivers, full of fish and game, and wonderful. So capitalists who came here, people who came here wanted to start a business, were able to do it quickly and easily. Everything was in order with one exception. One thing wasn't here enough of: workers. This country had a perpetual labor shortage. And how did you get people from other parts of the world, particularly those parts from which the capitalists themselves came, Europe, to come here? Well, Americans solved the problem in 2 ways. For the southern half of the United States, the solution was African slavery. You brought the people here by buying them, by collecting them through military means and so on, and bringing them to the South. But for the rest of the country, the North, the Midwest, and remember the rest of the country wasn't settled then, you had to do it by raising wages. To make a foreigner in Europe rip up his life or her life, tear herself away from family, friends, culture, religion, geography, and everything else, to make a dangerous trip across the ocean to an unknown place, you've got to provide a lot of incentive to get people to do that in any numbers. So that was done by selling to the Europeans the idea in America you could start anew and you could do way better than anything you could hope for in your native country, which for 150 years was true. So that the letters sent back by the immigrants brought more immigrants because they validated this story. It turned out for the employer, not only do I have to raise the wages to bring them from Europe, but no sooner do they come here and they realize they can run off into the interior at any time. There's so much free land that they can become, once again, peasants, which is what most of them had been in Europe anyway. They knew how to do that. So you had to raise wages to bring them, and then you had to keep raising wages to keep them. So wages rose. And it worked for capitalists because the upper line, the line of productivity, how much output each worker produced, that was rising too, because people worked hard here, because immigrants were the kind of people who had the extra to come this distance to work real hard, because they were driven hard by their employers, and because they were paid well. They worked. So it was a nirvana capitalism. Rising productivity, rising wages. A capitalism in which both sides were doing real well, catching up and eventually overtaking the older capitalisms in England, above all. Wow. Believing you lived in a charmed country, better than anywhere else. Unbelievable opportunity for working people. You know it all because those of you that are Americans have grown up in that. And now you understand the historic roots. Try to imagine with me quickly then, what happens in the 1970s when all of this stops? And it stops in the 1970s.
Nothing good happens.
Because the labor shortage is over.
But you know
and it never
that
comes
much.
back. So let's quickly see what happened. First, the computer. The computer, an important modern invention, replaces huge numbers of people. Think of a grocery store. You once needed an army of 50 inventory people to keep track of how many boxes of Rice Krispies moved off the shelf so you would know when to order more replacements. Now, as you all know, it scans by a computer as your Rice Krispie box goes across
Sinners today.
the
Great
scanner.
movie.
And somebody sitting in Boise, Idaho can tell you how many boxes of Rice Krispies have to be sent to every grocery store in America, and it can tell you that on an hour-by-hour basis. Computers wiped out the need for millions of people. Number two, by the 1970s, American capitalists
This video is
had an
from
incentive,
2012,
of course,
I
to
believe.
use computers.
No, 2013.
Because wages had been rising for 150 years, they were higher in America than any other capitalist had. And by the 1970s, the peculiar position of the United States after World War II, when we were the only capitalist country that was left, everything else had been destroyed by the war, that was over. The Japanese and the Germans led the recovery of our competitors. By the 1970s, they were competing. By the 1970s, Americans were getting used to learning new names for cars. Instead of Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler, they learned Toyota, Datsun, and all the rest. So Americans were worried. We're at a disadvantage because our workers get paid too much. Ha-ha! A computer, I get rid of the worker. Who needs the worker? I buy one computer, I can fire 50 high-priced workers. Second thing capitalists did, besides instituting computers, is to move production out of the United States, big time. Where? To where workers hadn't had this experience, which is where? Everywhere else in the world. To take advantage of cheap labor. Why did they do that? That goes back to what I told you. Because the capitalist gets more surplus, the less he has to pay the workers for the work they do. So of course you move from here and reopen the factory in Shanghai. Of course, Starbucks is opening more new coffee shops in China than it is in the United States now. Of course. You know what you have to pay a coffee producer and a barista in Shanghai? More or less nothing. I mean, it's more than nothing. They have to live, but not much more. And by American standards, fantastic. So, two other things happen. Not only are jobs disappearing because the computer and export of jobs is happening, but suddenly more Americans, or people in America, are looking for work. First and most important, adult, white women move into the paid labor force by the millions, starting in the 1970s. Whether you call that women's liberation, or you call that a changing culture, or whatever you call it, there's a movement of a whole new part of our population who used to define themselves as mothers, homemakers, and wives, and all of that, and they want a job now. They want a job out there in the world, just like the men do. So they're coming in huge numbers. And finally, we have yet another wave of immigration for a whole host of reasons, but not from Europe this time, mostly from Latin America. Coming in, looking for work, women looking for work at a time when the computer and export of jobs, the labor shortage is over. The supply of workers now exceeds the demand. And what does every capitalist do, whether or not he's ever gone to a business school? He realizes, I don't have to raise wages anymore, ever. I got loads of people who want a job and can't find one. If any of my workers complain that I've stopped raising wages, I say to them, have a nice day. There's 400 people out there who would take your job tomorrow. So be real quiet, and I won't slam the door on you. And you know something? Most employers don't have to tell that to workers. They already figured it out.
It's true. You're disposable.
Notice this line? That's the line of real wages in the United States. They stopped rising in the 1970s, and they never resumed again. Oh my God. An American people who believe they're in a promised land, a land cherished by God, where it's their birthright to do better, to have a higher standard of living, to promise their children the American dream, can't do it because the wages to pay for it aren't there. American workers do two things. By the way, why? Because what I'm showing you, these graphs, was never discussed in the United States. No national conversation wasn't begun by the president at the time, by the Congress, by the leading opinion makers, by the universities. Nothing. So this horrible change in our situation was experienced by the American people the way they experience most social changes, as if it were an individual problem. Your wages aren't going up, you're a dummy. You didn't take the right courses. You don't have the right degrees.
You
don't
fools.
work hard enough. You drink too much pot, whatever. And Americans felt bad. They blamed themselves. We are the leading country on earth to do that, and we blamed ourselves. So what did Americans do? They responded to the end of rising wages by making more people go out and work. Another reason for the adult women to get out there, because if the family was going to have the American dream, it now needed two people working full-time, not just one. Old people came out of retirement. Teenagers learned the joys of a Saturday job, etc. Today, Americans do, according to the OECD, a major research association, Americans do more hours of paid labor per year, on average, than any other working class in any country on this planet.
Yeah, we're getting fucked over, guys.
Work ourselves to death. And that's a reaction to this. But that didn't solve the problem. It didn't make enough extra money. Because in our strange society, when women go out to work, it turns out that the family has a whole bunch of new expenses. The mother who stayed home made all the food. When she works a regular job, she can't do that. So now we buy, fast food. It's expensive. It's expensive. And mother has to have a transportation. We don't have a public transportation system in this country, in 90% of our country, so it meant a second car. She has to have another set of clothes to go out and work in the office. You put it all together, the net income left after her income with all the extra expenses can't solve the problem. So the American working class becomes a new pioneer. Not anymore crossing the continental United States. We did that a century earlier. The working class of America becomes the first working class in modern history to borrow a quantity of money for its regular daily life that no other working class had ever imagined, let alone undertaken. You in this room are used to going into a bodega in New York City when it's hot and you want a bottle of water and handing someone a credit card. That means you're borrowing the money for the bottle of water. That's a level of credit use and debt that's unheard of in the history of the human race. Americans went into debt. They borrowed. They kept borrowing. Okay, you don't need a PhD in economics. You really don't. Take it from someone who has one. You don't need it. But if you keep borrowing and your wages are flat, pretty soon you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Because the wage is what you have to pay back the debts you're accumulating. And if the wage is going nowhere and your debts are going up, then say by, I don't know, 2007, you're busted. You're done.
You're
the
done.
American working class in 2007 is dead.
I really want this guy to demand pictures of Spider-Man from me.
It can't. It hasn't got the wages, and it can't borrow any more money because it can't pay back the money it already borrowed. It can't. That's why the crisis lingers, because the mass purchasing power of the United States is exhausted by a history of the whole country, not just by the last couple years. Now, quickly, let's look at it from the capitalist point of view. How have the years since the 1970s been for them? Spectacular. Unbelievably good. Best time ever in the history of American capitalism. Why? Real simple. The upper line, productivity. Workers became more productive over the last 30 years, just as they had become more productive in the earlier years. Why? A worker with a computer can do more things in an hour than a worker without one. Not a tough one. Workers' education was getting better. Workers' discipline was getting better. Capitalists were driving their workers harder. For all those reasons, productivity. And what is productivity? The amount of goods and services a worker can deliver to the boss per hour of his or her work. Your productivity, how much stuff you can produce. Okay, again, remember, I promise you don't need a PhD. If for the last 35 years, the wages were flat, what is the wage? It's what the boss gives you for coming to work.
The boss.
Flat. What productivity is what you give the boss when you work. It goes up. Okay, come on. You can see where we're going, right? The surplus, what you produce over and above what you get out of what you produce, that's the difference between these two lines. That's what the surplus is. That's what these lines measure. So the surplus goes nuts in the last 35 years. We have the greatest peacetime stock market boom we've ever had in our country. Of course, the stock market is the people who get pieces of this surplus. That's what they do when they buy and sell stocks. What do the capitalists do? They can't get over it.
Jobert, thank you
like
for
they were
subscribing
born
to
at the
Prime.
exact right moment. Or not born,
I really
but,
appreciate
arrived
the admiration
at
and
being the head of
respect.
Dipsy Doodle
And
Corporation.
thank you always for
And
turning out
this is as true on
for
Wall
stream.
Street
I
as it
appreciate
is on
you
Main
too.
Street. A distinction that only in the American imaginary could figure as important. Every capitalist took advantage of this. I don't have to pay my workers anymore because we don't have a labor shortage anymore. But I can get out of them as much as
I like his
computer and
capitalist
another
voice a
pressure
lot.
can generate. They all did that. The little ones with 6 workers, all of whom they know by their first name, and the big corporation with 10,000 employees. They all did it the same. They're all equally coupable, as the French would say. Guilty, guilty. Okay, so they're sitting on a mountain of money getting bigger. What do they do with it? They have to speed up a little now, quickly. But I can see I have your attention, so I'll play with it. Number one, the capitalists looked at this situation and they were smart. They did not make the analysis I'm presenting to you. Because that would make them what? The leeches who cashed in on a social situation that made wages stop rising. They wouldn't like to think of themselves as leeches. Most people don't. So they came up with a different story.
I don't want to think of myself as a
Ready?
leech.
Here it was. The reason corporations are making all this mountain of money is because they're led by entrepreneurial geniuses. No. I mean, it's real serious.
Oh, Vox Syndicate?
Those of you
A lot of it is explained by the fact that here in America, people drive a lot. Like, a lot. Like, if you buy a car that's 20 years old here, there's a good chance it has been driven a lot, and that a lot is going to go wrong with it as a result. Like, people are afraid of buying those types of cars specifically because it could financially ruin them if they need to repair.
that are a little bit older, you remember names like Lee
Yeah, you
Iacocca
drive everywhere and it's super
or
far.
Jack Welch. Iacocca was the head of Chrysler or Ford or one of them.
No,
Jack
like,
Welch
no
was the head of
cities here are
GE.
walkable.
We began to have, in the 1970s and 80s, all these books about these fantastic corporate executives who were making all this money. They were telling a story that they did something. I always thought that was wonderful, because if it was their genius that was making money then, it must have been their stupidity that was preventing it back there. But that was an implication they didn't worry about. There was method to their madness, and madness it was. Because of course, if the reason the company is making a ton of money is the great leadership of the top executive, rather than the end of a labor shortage, then it would be reasonable for the top executive to say, pay me, because I'm the one who's making all the money. In the 1970s, the average of what a CEO got in relationship to the average wage of a worker was 43 to 1. Last year, it was over 400 to 1. You understand the difference? You understand the difference? So the first thing that this mountain of surplus was used for was to create a whole new class of super rich people who either were top executives or had shares in the companies and were given big dividends and so forth as this situation exploded. They're the people that live in the right neighborhoods, that have the co-ops in Tribeca, the houses in the Hamptons, and so on, okay? Second thing that was done with the surplus: expand the movement of jobs out of the country. For an American corporation to close a factory in Schenectady or to close an office in the Bronx and move to China is very scary too. It's kind of the reverse scare of an immigrant coming here. It's dangerous, it's risky, you don't quite know. It's something you hesitate to do unless you're flush with money. A good part of this money was used to keep the whole system going by moving production out of the country, because they could afford it now. They had the money to take those risks. And that's when you see the acceleration of moving businesses to India, China, and all the rest. Third, money was used by these wealthy people, top CEOs, and the people becoming very rich because they were the top CEOs. They understood something which wealthy people have always understood. If your society, especially one like ours that celebrated that we're all in the middle class and everybody's more or less equal, if you suddenly wrench this society into a polarizing rich and poor, the way we have done for 30 years, which is why Occupy
You have a
Wall Street
2008
did that
Honda with
1%,
only 45K
99%
miles on it? That's
slogan.
crazy.
If you do that, the 1% understand
Driving
the
it until it's
ultimate
dead and
problem
gone is
capitalism
exactly what
has
I do with my
always
Subaru
had,
Forester.
just like feudalism and slavery
It's
had
my
it
plan.
too. If a tiny number of people have a ton of stuff, and a vast number of people don't, you're going to have trouble.
Right here in
And
River City.
especially in a society where the political system, at least on paper, says everybody gets a vote, which we do. So then rich people understand we're screwing the hell out of them really well, the mass of people in the economy. But they may decide to use the political system to undo the screwing they're getting in the economic system. They might use their control of politics, they have the votes, to get the taxes changed, to get the government spending changed, to get everything changed, to get back politically what they lost on the job. So the only way the wealthy can protect themselves is they've got to control the politics. And over the last 30 years, that's what they did. They bought it, because that's what they had, money. And they went in and they bought the parties and they bought the politics. You know all that, you don't need me for that. Meanwhile, the mass of people, because, remember what I told you about how they reacted to this situation, they sent more people out to work, they borrowed more money. The average American family is freaked out. It's working too many hours. It's got no time to do anything. It's worried sick about its debts. The emotional life of the family, which used to be held together by the mother, can't be, because she's as exhausted from her work as the father is, and he never learned how to do it anyway. Well, it's a very serious problem. The family is falling apart. 30 years ago, the standard comedic program on an evening TV was a wonderfully intact family. Remember Ricky Nelson and the other family? The father goes out to work, the mother waits for him with a big smile when he comes home with a briefcase, and they all have dinner together with the dog. Today, we turn on the television, what do we see? A couple who can't stand each other, who haven't had sex in so long they forgot what it's like. They don't know their children. And we laugh with the recognition of the dissolution of the family. Hello. This is a family who is so freaked out, so worked up, so anxiety-ridden, they don't go to political meetings anymore. And since they don't participate, they don't pay any attention. So, of course, over the last 30 years, the mass of the American people, the working class...
Did Wolff just
withdraws
talk
from
nasty
politics.
to us? Yes.
We haven't become right-wing. It's that the support for the left wing that comes out of the
Filthy,
1930s,
filthy Dick Wolff.
the New Deal, the Democrat, that stopped being political, and in came the people with the money who replaced them. And of course, we therefore have what we have. A system corrupted by what? By the same basic capitalist way of handling this situation. Nothing has changed. Now to answer my questions in the remaining 5 minutes. Have wages started to go up? Not at all. Has productivity stopped rising? Not at all. That's why the profits reported by business remain robust. Of course they do. In fact, wages are tending down now because of the competition of all the unemployed who need work and will work for less and less. There's a strike going on now in the Caterpillar company in Peoria, Illinois. 800 highly paid, technically adept factory workers. The demands of Caterpillar: 6-year no wage increase commitment, 6-year no pension increase. Over those 6 years, prices are rising currently 2 to 3% a year. Do the arithmetic. If you don't get any increase in your pension, you don't get any increase, you're taking a loss in what you can actually afford. That's what's offered by them. And when the union said no, strike. They don't care. They're moving production out of the country anyway. Corporations have no incentive to change this. Why should they? When it is said to them, you know, Americans who are unemployed, Americans whose wages are not going up, will not be able to buy things, they say, of course they won't. And they use the following language from economics. The United States is a mature economy. As anybody over 40 knows, the minute you hear that word mature, you're in trouble. It is a polite word for an unpleasant thought. The United States as a mature economy means it's not an economy that's growing anymore. It's an economy that's shrinking in the way that matters to capitalists. They won't buy. So if you're a company that needs to grow, to survive, to compete, your growth is going to be somewhere else. Which means we're now entering a new phase of American history. After 35 years in which first manufacturing was moved out of the United States, and now white-collar work is moved out of the United States, we now have the final step. Corporations see their market as elsewhere in the world. So they're not going to spend a lot of advertising dollars in Michigan.
True,
They're
Gamer
going to spend
G.
it in Mumbai. They're not going to open an office to look for new contacts of new business in Peoria. They're going to open it in Eastern Europe or Latin America. That's where growth is happening. Brazil, Russia, China, India, not here. So those of you who think that corporations will save us because Americans have to have the money to buy, no, they don't. They're looking for other people. So with a political system dominated by them, and they see no need to change, no change is going to come from the top. Last point. What happened in the 1930s?
It's got to be us.
In the 1930s,
there's one way out.
It was different. The
One way out, Chad.
depression was very bad, worse than it is now.
Organizing.
Unemployment in 1933 was 25%. Today it's 8.5%, 3 times worse. Numbers are not exactly comparable, but you get the idea. So the situation then was worse than it was today. There's no money. Every city and state, like today, we don't have the money. We have to cut back the services. We have to lay off people. We have to. Companies not hiring, terrible. In the midst of that impossibility, the way today Obama and, what's his name? Romney.
Hey, Danny Mae Vossen, thank you for the $10 super chat. Appreciate your schedule. Just got home from playing a show in St. Paul. We transflagged the back of our guitars to raise as a statement mid-set. A fun night and good to get home and chill in here. Hell yeah, that's dope as fuck. Hope you had a great show. It sounds like you did. And, gotta represent my hometown. Let's go. My home turf. Maybe that's a better way of saying, since I'm not technically from St. Paul.
Are discussing what cuts have to be done. And the Democrats pose as those who will cut us less. The Republicans will cut us more. In the middle of that, something happens in the 1930s that ought to make you sit up and take notice. Roosevelt, in 1933 and 4, begins to do what would now appear to be bizarre things. He gets on the radio and he says, I'm going to create the Social Security system. We never had that before. I'm going to give every American 65 years of age or older, in the depths of the Depression, money every month for as long as you live. Here, have a nice day. Wow. Where was the money going to come from? But before anyone could even answer the question, he goes on the radio the next day and he says, I'm going to create for the first time an unemployment compensation system. If you lose your job for no fault of your own, we didn't have that before, just like we never had a Social Security system before that, the government will give you for a year or two a weekly wage for not working. Whoa, you can see why the American anthem would become popular. Wow. There were tens of millions of people unemployed. We're talking big bucks. And then the third day he went on the radio and said, yeah,
Richard
the
Wolff,
two things I'm
Anders.
spending money on, I already told you about, it's nothing. Wait till you hear this. He created and filled 12.5 million federal jobs working for the federal government. Social Security for old people, unemployment compensation for the unemployed, and jobs. Where did the mountain of money come from? Answer. Roosevelt went to the corporations and the rich, and he said to them, fellas, remember he comes from that were his friends, his neighbors, his relatives. He says, I got really bad news. You see all those people marching in Union Square in New York, carrying banners? Those are people from the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, the greatest union drive in American history. In the midst of the Depression, the CIO unionized millions of workers who had never been in a union before. And he did that with the help of the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, and the Communist Party, all of which were powerful in the United States at that time. And they were in the news every day. They were marching everywhere. And he went to the rich and the corporation and said, well, you got two alternatives, gentlemen. One, you give me a shitload of money so that I can take care of these miserable people suffering through the Depression. I got to give them something big. Because if you don't, coming down the road behind me are the CIO, the Socialists, and the Communists, and they're going to cut you a lot worse deal than I'm offering.
Yep.
Half of the rich and the corporations.
This, by the way, is why I always talk about Roosevelt being kind of the not traitor, but like the what's the word I'm looking for? Compromise. He was the compromise with capital. The entire deal was like, oh yeah, we'll do liberal capitalism, we'll have controls, we'll, make it all work, and in return, like, we're going to provide a social safety net. We're going to make sure lives for workers are good, and well, capital reneged on the deal.
Understood what he said and went with him. The other half didn't buy it. The other half are what then rebuilt the Republican Party after the war to make sure that never happened again. But the half that went with Roosevelt allowed him to go back to the AFL-CIO, well, it was then just the CIO, and the socialists and the communists, and he said, look, I'm going to get you something for the mass of the suffering people who are creating your movement. I'm going to give them Social Security, I'm going to give them unemployment insurance, and I'm going to give them a job. I'm going to give them what you're demanding, but you got to forget that crap about going beyond capitalism. You got to drop that stuff.
No more going beyond
because then I
plus
can't
ultra.
get them. That deal was made. That deal was agreed to by all of them. Some with more grief about it, some with more hesitation, but they all bought it. That deal was done. They paid the money in taxes, highest taxes corporations and rich people ever paid in America in those years. It's been cutting those taxes ever since. Okay, top income tax bracket in 1943, the middle of the war, 94%. Rich people, every dollar they got over about $60,000, they had to give 94 cents to Uncle Sam. They got to keep 6. The same rate today, 35 cents they give to Uncle Sam. The other 65 they keep to themselves. In 1944, Roosevelt went to the Congress and presented a bill that would create a maximum income in the United States. Nobody could earn more than what the equivalent is today, was $25,000 then. The equivalent today would be $350,000. For every nickel that any American earned above $350,000, the tax would be, ready? 100%. You don't get it. That was proposed by the President of the United States. And when the Congress went ballistic because of the business interests, the deal, the compromise was that 94%. So he got the money out of the rich. And he created that. And that meant that the Great Depression wasn't as horrible on American people, even though it was a worse depression than the current crisis is, which isn't so bad a depression, but there's no cushion. There's no help. There's nothing. Why? Why? Why is it so bad? That's the question I promised to answer. The final answer, besides all the analysis, is that there was a movement then. Roosevelt had to go to the rich because below was coming something very scary, not only demanding all these benefits, but threatening social change, economic criticism. They were making the concrete demand to debate and change the economic system. And they were so scared, the people at the top, they gave them all of that. By the way, was the politician who made this happen Roosevelt? Taking a great risk, the way Obama has his people tell Occupy Wall Street, I can't do these things. I'm with you, but I can't do these things. It's too difficult. Roosevelt did these things. And what was his reward? The most popular president in the history of the United States. He was reelected 4 times. No president had ever been reelected 4 times. The Republicans were so freaked out by it that after he died, they got the law passed that gives every president only a maximum of 2 terms. This wasn't a political chance Roosevelt took. It's what made him the most popular president in the history of the country. It was the movement from below that observed no taboo that made the difference. And final irony, and if you understand this, you understand a lot of what Hegel tried to teach us about social development. When the war was over, when the Depression had been overcome by the war, that half of the business and rich community that had never bought the threat from below, that were prepared to fight, didn't go with Roosevelt. They made sure to undo as their #1 priority the movement that had gotten Roosevelt to provide for people in the depths of the Depression. They went to destroy the labor movement, they went to destroy the socialist parties, and they went to destroy the Communist Party. And they have succeeded. Over the last 50 years, the labor movement has declined in its strength every single year. It's a line that looks like that. The AFL-CIO today represents less than 7% of private sector employees in the United States. It's done. You can't do anything.
Though it is doing more and more as we go forward.
The socialist and communist parties are virtual. I mean, they exist, but their political influence is nothing compared to what it once was. They went after them. They destroyed them. And now the irony. The big historical question. Could capitalism have survived an 11-year depression in the 1930s had the leader not provided for people Social Security, unemployment compensation, and jobs? Would things have polarized, and then what? The argument that was always made was that the movement from below saved capitalism from its own excesses. If that's true, then you must wonder whether the system has now destroyed the only chance it has to avoid the cataclysm it avoided last time, because it destroyed the left that might have made this society handle this crisis in a different way. Europe is moving ever closer to the edge of a cliff. The United States is literally talking about a fiscal cliff at the end of this year, if you pay attention to these things. We have a capitalism that is spinning out of control. It produced a depression and a collapse that was not expected. It has shown itself unable for 5 years to handle it, to overcome it, to fix it. And it is now pushing ahead as if it doesn't have to deal with this problem. It can just go on. Occupy Wall Street is the first sign, the same mechanisms are reviving again. Nobody knows how that'll develop or where it'll go. But it's a very peculiar capitalism that produces these kinds of catastrophes and develops a politics that makes it uniquely incapable of handling its own problems. The only bad news in all of this is that you and I are living and have to live through this. And the only way to change
it's not great. Not great, Dick
is
Wolff.
if another movement from below can be created, either to reproduce what happened in the 30s, at least a softer, gentler depression, or the alternative that was avoided in the 30s, which is a final coming to terms with whether capitalism is indeed the best this country can do. But lest you think I'm ending on a pessimistic note, which I'm not, I can assure you that speaking across the country as I do, doing the media work that I do, more interest is in the kinds of analysis I've just tried to present to you in the last 2 years than in the previous 40. Whatever you hear and read about the Tea Party, something very big is changing in the United States below the surface, where the interest in, the openness to, the literal hunger for analytic explanations of the sort I've just given you is greater than anything. And I was active in the 1960s. This is, from that point of view, a much better situation than we had then. Much more interest, much more response. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think this guy's full of bangers. Don't look into one of his more recent talks, though. It's a real downer. Clap, 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 clap. All right. It is very late. I'm going to finish up this round of Shape Hero Factory. Been trying to win like one round on stream, and I'm not very good at the challenges in this game. Oh god. Let's see. Do some more research. Put it into bridge conveyor belts. And just optimize this real quick. I think that will help us produce a bit more. But I think I'm on track to win this round, okay? And instead we got the next decade of Steve Bannon discovering from mining gold in World of Warcraft he could politically radicalize gamers. Yeah. Yeah. 12 years ago that was already happening. Sadly. What did he do that's a downer? Oh, just, you know, this is how America ends is the name of one of his most recent talks. So that's great. Be a chaotic kitten. I will be probably in bed by the time you get back, but that is all right. That happens sometimes. Are his non-foreign policy comments in the current age still good? As far as I can tell, yeah. His economic takes are generally pretty good. I like them sufficiently. Do I have anything else I'm not really utilizing? Not really. I'm going all in on this run to try and use copy machines to create a bunch of supercharged super soldiers using this Blade of the Chosen tile, and it's working pretty well for me so far. I'm gonna unlock their 3rd tier ability, and that is gonna be nice as fuck. There we go. Research-wise, I don't really need a whole lot of anything. I also don't really need money. I think I need, like, triangle manufacturing. I need to not be convinced that I also need spicy noodles. Eat the spicy noodles. You should eat the spicy noodles. Is it too late for me to order a Taco Bell? That's my question. It probably is. But it's worth taking a look at. Taco Bell. It's not too late. I barely ate today. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire? Nah, I mean, kind of. I'm not a monster. I'm just running the factory without any employee democratic input. In my defense, though, my employees are puppets that I puppeteer. And, you know, the more I talk about this after us deep diving into a socialist lecture, the more I feel really gross about it. That's what they all say, right? Aw. Do 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 do. Do, 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 do. I live to fight another day. Forces level up 1 rank when obtained. I don't know what that means. I'm a puppet now? Dance, puppet, dance. JK. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. Ba-ba-ba-da-ba. Ba-ba-ba-da-ba. Take the research points and then I can upgrade my direct attack. There we go. Still worth it. Pew pew ba-doo boo. How we doing, chat? Are you feeling good? Marginally. I know things are a real hellscape out there. But right now we are all okay. Fuck it, I'm ordering a quesadilla. It's been a week. It's been a fucking week. Thank you for the little song. I'm really struggling the last few days. I'm sorry to hear that. At 4 a.m., I'm really hungry. Really has been a week. It really has. Like, I have streamed like 6 to 8. No, like I've done like 8-hour streams like almost every day this week. It's been a lot. I'm a human. Guys, most people only do like 1 hour long shows. Like, if you're at Showbiz, you do 1 hour long show. I do fucking 8-hour long shows. Whew. Can you read me a bedtime story and or sing a lullaby? I mean, maybe. That seems like a lot right now. Maybe on a new night. Had to miss last night's stream for mental health. I don't blame you one goddamn bit. Are you tired? Yeah, of course I am. It gets to me. I'm a human being. I'm not just a puppet, unlike the people who work at my factory. I mean, puppets who work at my factory. How do I do this? The logistics are difficult, but I will persevere and I will make the best factory I can. The best goddamn factory. I think I know how to do it. yeah. Bum, bum, bum. Yes. Nailed it. Okay, now we just need to build a second one, but now we need an output. I guess we can do that here. Oh, actually, wait. You there. You're all going in. I must continue to feed bodies to the blade. Sounds really grim. They're just trying to pull the they're just trying to pull a sword out of a stone, guys. It's not serious business. Or is it? Nailed it. Some stipendium? You know what? Sure. Wow, there have only been 3 mic pops? That's actually pretty good.
Welcome to space. What were you expecting? It's a dangerous place. Thank you for investing. Go there for your rota, there for your orders. Fill up these quotas, we'll bill for your quarters. Report to your foreman, but watch for marauders. Cause if you get eaten, there's fees for your mourners. Prosperity's there in the care of magnates.
Probably not. I'm feeling really low
It was
key.
supposed to look like the poster. It mostly does. Oh, if you'd only read closer. Just 10 short years to a new frontier. Snooze as you cruise and you'll wake up here. You've been trapped in that ship for an awful long time, so perhaps you have simply forgot what you signed.
The song is The
Honestly,
Fine Print
did you not
by
read the colony
Stipendium.
policy
There you go.
that defined you as company property? That wavered your say in autonomy. The conglomerates got you in lock and key. We put the dollar back into idolatry. If you're upset, you can rent an apology. We are a family forged in bureaucracy. No I in team, but there's con in economy. Were you expecting adventure? Were you hoping for fun? My friend, you're indentured and pleasures exempt from your tenure, so venture back down to your slum that's provided at generous prices. Your worth is determined by your sacrifices. A small term of service went down on the surface. Internment's a freebie that comes with the purchase. To earn the right to work. 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 To earn the right to give ourselves the right to buy, ourselves the right to live, to earn the right to die. To our little town, why don't you settle down? You just fill out the paperwork and you could look around. We're happy as can be inside the valley cannery. We live to pack the cans of meat and not to question where it's found until we end up in the ground around the corner in the yard. You know, we thought we liked the sound of finding glory in the stars. The borders taught us to be proud of never reaching very far. So we earn what we're allowed and give it right back.
It's really, really good.
Ale to cure what ails you. Zero G brew, your favorite flavor. So work till you bleed. Ennobled by labor, then purchase relief from your local retailer. If you'd rather drop dead, that's fine. But you know to drop it down dead, there's a fine. So you do your job and now do mine. I gotta meet a 6 foot deep bottom line. We make a fortune for the board by selling boredom door to door, because it's all that we deserve and it is all we can afford. The secrets of the universe and all the worlds to be explored, but our dreams are back on earth and now the work is our reward. And you'll be grateful for seats at the table, though it dips at one end and the bench is unstable. You may waste your days, but at least you were able to pay off your grave since we leased you your cradle. Be faithful and pray, we'll repay what you invest. Behave as you slave for humanity's interest, on account that you're all on account and we're quickly amounting humanity's interest. You'd think that we'd sink to the brink of rebellion with markets dependent on peddling weapons. The architect tells them the secret to heaven is simply consuming whatever we sell them. We work to earn the right to work, 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 to earn the right to give ourselves the right to buy ourselves the right to live, to earn the
Oh, Gamer G, are you trying to beat it without anyone dying?
my friend.
The hardest challenge.
You should have read the fine print, my friend. Should have read the fine print. Welcome to our little town. Why don't you settle down? You just fill out the paperwork and you can look around. We work and then 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 we end up in the ground. Welcome to our little town. Why don't you settle down? You just fill out the paperwork and you can look around. We work and then we work and then we work and then we work and then we work. Should have read the fine print. Here. And here, and initial here. Welcome to the family.
I really enjoyed that.
Corporation thanks you for choosing this.
Let's do another Stupendium song. What a 10 out of 10 channel. What about Shadow the Hedgehog song? Let's go.
I will find myself in these memories. Bring control into the chaos, storming deep through all the pain. Find the light I lost, step the edge of pain. It fades, but I remain. Will I always be a shadow of myself? I pick up the pieces, repeat and repeat till the sequence ceases. Trying to write a thesis, defining me in defiance of all the anxiety is like cryosleep. All those years locked away while the whole world got to play. Self-left to rot decay. Now I'm not the same, but it's not too late, cause I've got today. Go watch today. All the flashbacks are crack and the memories isolate. As I grasp at the fragments of destiny lost the shade. My whole best on display, let's demonstrate. And I forgot where I lost the way, so allow me to postulate.
I love Miracle of Sound.
Hard to say that I'm not the fake. They say I'm fearless, they say I'm strong, they say I'm peerless, and they're not wrong. But I was engineered for a job that's gone, so I'll spend the years just grinding on. Tell me, does it make you free or worthless if you can't complete your purpose? Am I the character between curse and cure, or just surplus neath the surface?
David Hogg's been going hard, Gamer G. I've loved it. I even got a good email from Ken Martin today, which is nice.
Hedgehog's supposed to do when resolution's overdue. It's been 20 years since I first appeared and I still don't know the truth. Ain't nobody lived a life so gritty as I blaze through midlife crisis city on a motorcycle with a loaded rifle and the hope that vital quite the nihilist in me. Cast from a demon and the dreams of man, and that dream cast me left to sleep abandoned. Had my light dash till I see the pattern of an arc so dark it eclipses canon. How many chapters and pages left as I cling to the last to escape the next? As I sift through the past on a razor's edge, as I pick which path on the stage select. How to find a way? No, I'm not programmed. No, I got no cage, but I got no plan. On a final chase, trying to find a place, but I'm out of taste when the clock grows ends. What's the point of running at light speed if I'm running from the choice of who I might be? At the life I lead, looking behind me because it was so much easier in the 90s. It was just a simpler time, you know? I will find myself in these memories.
Polling showing Trump getting cooked. I hope it continues to be worse for him.
Can't you see me at the window with my hand against the glass? Time is leaving me in limbo, forced to languish in the past. Now the future lies before me as I break from this machine. Live and learn to write my story until I am old man. Control into the chaos, storming deep through all the pain. Find the light I'm lost, at the edge of pain. The light fades, but I remain. Will I always be a shadow of myself? The age I was playing Sonic Adventure 2 was probably the last point in my life I remember actually understanding everything, who I am, where I'm going. The biggest problem in my life was trying to beat Canon's core, and now I have a mortgage. Adulting is hard.
The all-over overkill is back with almost every unique Stupendium logo from all
It's okay, Stupendium. No one understands everything. Even the children who understood everything about Shadow the Hedgehog, they were lying. They didn't know anything about him. They couldn't even begin to grasp the reality of him. Let's do the Fallout song they have. This is fun. I'm enjoying this.
Do you think that the world can ever be fixed? Is America buried? Did it ever exist? Were you hoping for a life of heavenly bliss? When you stepped out of vote number 76, feels like we've waited forever for this. Dust off those chips and selection of dips. Rehydrate those ancient celery sticks, 'cause we're gonna have a party down in 76. Today's a day for celebration. We've been locked away, but we've been making preparations. Sweep away decay and all the waves of devastation. Now we're at the dawn, another day of reclamation. Preservation of the nation. It's a fate we waited every day in dedication. To build a haven, pave the way for generations of what's left of all tech participation. Deep beneath the wastes of Virginia is a place where we could have stayed safe for millennia. But tensions get frayed after just a few decades, so we're certain that the surface ought to be a little friendlier. Shine your shoes, 'cause the hour is a handful. Join a hand in hand with fellow man to save the land. So I packed in dandy apples in a satchel with some Blamco. Stepped out of the gate to meet the neighbors in its blammo. Do you think that the world could ever be fixed? Is America buried? Did it ever exist? Were you hoping for a life of heavenly bliss? When you stepped out of vault number 76, oh, you lost it all, well, you better be quick. Build a hovel from the rubble while the reverie sticks. Now you gotta build a heaven using death as the bricks. If you wanna have a life out of 76.
I did it. I beat the level. I did it. Huzzah!
But your house will do just fine. Not to think maybe now's a prudent time. Not to practice in the rowdy mutants fly. Now I'm an optimist, but was it a bad decision to make a mission out of living in a vicious cataclysm? Sitting in the wilderness and killing for provisions. If all we have its faults, but all the halls were a condition. I went from level-headed fella to a villain. So forgive me if it's not what I envisioned, but we're citizens
Hello,
selected out of brilliant
Jugglebots.
civilians. I thought that some decorum while exploring was a given. Hi, Joe. How you doing today? I haven't seen you since the fall barbecue last May. All right. Oh, jeez. Okay. You can keep the carcass. I'll be on my way. Road, take me home to a place that won't radiate my bones. You're a silly little ditty with a playful tone.
I love the costuming too.
Country road, take me there to a pretty little crater in the open air. It's a bright new future, so don't be scared, 'cause everything glows with a bright.
I'm also just vibing. This is very fun.
Never be fixed. Is America buried? Did it ever exist? Were you hoping for a life of heavenly bliss? When you stepped out of vault number 76, is murdering suburbians getting your kicks? Well, we have to do refrain, the population is fixed. Rest assured that every resident was carefully picked to be remembered as a member of 76. Vault-Tec reminds you your purpose on the surface is to work to survive through adversity by working with the persons beside you. Nah, I never liked you. I'm gonna craft some ammo and fight you. There was a time I'd smile and pretend that I liked all my friends. When society ends, tell me why the pretense. Bring a violent end to that white picket fence. You missed my recital again. There's no keeping up with the Joneses. I've broken their noses. I've stolen their clothes if they came through the roaches. That ought to show him for mowing his lawn while I'm trying to focus on my cross.
Man, it's too bad this game never really took off.
Everyone's had that fantasy to be the last of humanity. You might think it's rad to see what will grow from this rad disease, the mutation of mass belief.
Who'd have guessed these nuclear arms would give me literally nuclear arms?
I hit ground zero at the move we can form, so what is the harm if we drop another couple of bombs? Who'd have thought the horrors of war could be awesome when chalking them up against the board? And before things were torched and we're forced to reform from assortments of morons, a quarter-century squabbles lay dormant. Pit boys and torches, blood in the porches.
Is it good now? That's pretty cool.
Setting the scourge on my mother-in-law was more fun than anything before the war was. Down to the hobby, you gotta get a hobby.
What game? Fallout 76.
So let's all go to the lobby and get ourselves a treat.
Alltech wishes to thank their loyal patrons.
What an excellent channel. Also, 76 is only like 20 years after the bombs fell. I have no idea what the story of the game is. Yeah, Trump's press secretary is going after Miss Rachel because she said that everyone, like all children deserve safety. Like when asked about Palestine, she made like a very, very unobjectionable statement about Palestine and about like how their children deserve to be safe. And like a lot of people are trying to cancel her apparently because people are fucking insane monsters these days. Good relaxing stream. Good night, Banana Brains. It has been a nice relaxing stream. The data stream, I don't know what that means. Is Miss Rachel the modern Mr. Rogers? Kind of. Yeah, she's like she's a YouTuber, and a lot of parents watch her content with their kids. Remind me next time, Vox Syndicate, because right now I need to pee so badly, and I think that just means we need to wrap up the stream. What was that Timothy Snyder talk we watched earlier? Here, let me grab it for you. Here you go. It also comes with a list of his other lectures related to this concept of unfreedom. So if you want to explore that more in depth, you can do so in the in the playlist that I'm linking. Also, hope you're having a good one, Lucy Hayes. Thank you all for watching today, folks, and I'll be on again later today with Dead Domain, and otherwise I'll be back on Monday after that. With that being said, Timothy Snyder is, in my experience, he does mostly Eastern Europe politics. Yeah, but he also talks about like authoritarianism, which, you know, goes hand in hand. Is she safe? Like, oh, like, is she... Yeah, no, as far as I know, no one's threatening her life, though I imagine that changes after Trump's press secretary attacks her. When you talking with Dead Domain? I don't know, sometime tomorrow. They're doing a stream noon until midnight, so it's a 12-hour stream. I'll be on sometime, I think, like, maybe afternoonish. We all know Jack has a crush on Timothy Snyder. Wait, no, I don't. He's not my type. I just think that he is good. Let's see here. I think he's both good and acceptable, and is a useful tool for radicalizing liberals in this moment. Yeah, let's raid into Real Radhom. Looks like he's doing a nice chill mini painting stream and going over Bernie Sanders stuff. So that's good shit right there. Trump is considering abandoning peace talks. he's a fucking monster. It's just every day it's something. I will say right before you guys go, I did find it extraordinarily funny that Trump is basically announcing that he's putting JD Vance in charge of the tariff negotiations with China. Very, very clearly because he's throwing JD Vance under the bus. JD Vance is the sacrificial lamb to take the bullet for Donald Trump's fuck up. God. It's very funny. Anyway, y'all have a good time over with Real Rad Hom. Bye.